Chapter 4. In the Dark. Where was he running? Where could she be except at Fyodor Pavlovitch's? She must have run straight to him from Samsonov's. That was clear now. The whole intrigue, the whole deceit was evident. It all rushed whirling through his mind. He did not run to Maria Kondratyevna's. There was no need to go there, not the slightest need. He must raise no alarm. They would run and tell directly. Maria Kondratyevna was clearly in the plot, Smerdyakov too. He too, all had been bought over. He formed another plan of action. He ran a long way round Fyodor Pavlovitch's house, crossing the lane, running down Dmitrovsky Street, then over the little bridge, and so came straight to the deserted alley at the back, which was empty and uninhabited, with on one side the hurdle fence of a neighbour's kitchen garden, on the other the strong, high fence that ran all round Fyodor Pavlovitch's garden. Here he chose a spot, apparently the very place, where, according to the tradition, he knew Lizaveta had once climbed over it. If she could climb over it, the thought, God knows why, occurred to him, surely I can. He did in fact jump up, and instantly contrived to catch hold of the top of the fence. Then he vigorously pulled himself up and sat astride on it. Close by, in the garden, stood the bath-house, but from the fence he could see the lighted window of the house too. Yes, the old man's bedroom is lighted up. She's there. And he leapt from the fence into the garden. Though he knew Grigory was ill, and very likely Smerdyakov too, and that there was no one to hear him, he instinctively hid himself, stood still, and began to listen. But there was dead silence on all sides, and, as though of design, complete stillness, not the slightest breath of wind. "And naught but the whispering silence," the line for some reason rose to his mind. "If only no one heard me jump over the fence. I think not." Standing still for a minute, he walked softly over the grass in the garden, avoiding the trees and shrubs. He walked slowly, creeping stealthily at every step, listening to his own footsteps. It took him 5 minutes to reach the lighted window. He remembered that just under the window there were several thick and high bushes of elder and white beam. The door from the house into the garden, on the left-hand side, was shut. He had carefully looked purposely to see in passing. At last he reached the bushes and hid behind them. He held his breath. "I must wait now," he thought, "to reassure them in case they heard my footsteps and are listening. If only I don't cough or sneeze." He waited 2 minutes. His heart was beating violently, and at moments he could scarcely breathe. "No, this throbbing at my heart won't stop," he thought. "I can't wait any longer." He was standing behind a bush in the shadow. The light of the window fell on the front part of the bush. "How red the white beam berries are," he murmured, not knowing why. Softly and noiselessly, step by step, he approached the window and raised himself on tiptoe. All Fyodor Pavlovitch's bedroom lay open before him. It was not a large room, and was divided in 2 parts by a red screen. Chinese, as Fyodor Pavlovitch used to call it. The word Chinese flashed into Mitya's mind. "And behind the screen is Grushenka," thought Mitya. He began watching Fyodor Pavlovitch, who was wearing his new striped silk dressing-gown, which Mitya had never seen, and a silk cord with tassels round the waist. A clean, dandified shirt of fine linen with gold studs peeped out under the collar of the dressing-gown. On his head Fyodor Pavlovitch had the same red bandage which Alyosha had seen. "He's got himself up," thought Mitya. His father was standing near the window, apparently lost in thought. Suddenly he jerked up his head, listened a moment, and hearing nothing went up to the table, poured out half a glass of brandy from a decanter, and drank it off. Then he uttered a deep sigh, again stood still a moment, walked carelessly up to the looking-glass on the wall, with his right hand raised the red bandage on his forehead a little, and began examining his bruises and scars, which had not yet disappeared. "He's alone," thought Mitya. "In all probability he's alone." Fyodor Pavlovitch moved away from the looking-glass, turned suddenly to the window and looked out. Mitya instantly slipped away into the shadow. "She may be there behind the screen. Perhaps she's asleep by now," he thought with a pang at his heart. Fyodor Pavlovitch moved away from the window. "He's looking for her out of the window, so she's not there. Why should he stare out into the dark? He's wild with impatience." Mitya slipped back at once and fell to gazing in at the window again. The old man was sitting down at the table, apparently disappointed. At last he put his elbow on the table and laid his right cheek against his hand. Mitya watched him eagerly. "He's alone. He's alone," he repeated again. "If she were here, his face would be different." Strange to say, a queer, irrational vexation rose up in his heart that she was not here. "It's not that she's not here," he explained to himself immediately, "but that I can't tell for certain whether she is or not." Mitya remembered afterwards that his mind was, at that moment, exceptionally clear, that he took in everything to the slightest detail and missed no point. But a feeling of misery, the misery of uncertainty and indecision, was growing in his heart with every instant. "Is she here or not?" The angry doubt filled his heart, and suddenly, making up his mind, he put out his hand and softly knocked on the window-frame. He knocked the signal the old man had agreed upon with Smerdyakov, twice slowly and then 3 times more quickly, the signal that meant "Grushenka is here." The old man started, jerked up his head, and jumping up quickly ran to the window. Mitya slipped away into the shadow. Fyodor Pavlovitch opened the window and thrust his whole head out. "Grushenka, is it you? Is it you?" he said in a sort of trembling half-whisper. "Where are you, my angel? Where are you?" He was fearfully agitated and breathless. "He's alone," Mitya decided. "Where are you?" cried the old man again, and he thrust his head out further, thrust it out to the shoulders, gazing in all directions, right and left. "Come here, I've a little present for you. Come, I'll show you." "He means the 3,000, thought Mitya. "But where are you? Are you at the door? I'll open it directly." And the old man almost climbed out of the window, peering out to the right, where there was a door into the garden, and trying to see into the darkness. In another second he would certainly have run out to open the door without waiting for Grushenka's answer. Mitya looked at him from the side, without stirring. The old man's profile that he loathed so, his pendant Adam's apple, his hooked nose, his lips that smiled in greedy expectation, were all brilliantly lighted up by the slanting lamplight falling on the left from the room. A horrible fury of hatred suddenly surged up in Mitya's heart. There he was, his rival, the man who had tormented him, had ruined his life. It was a rush of that sudden, furious, revengeful anger of which he'd spoken, as though foreseeing it, to Alyosha 4 days ago in the arbour, when, in answer to Alyosha's question, "How can you say he'll kill our father?" I don't know, he'd said then. "Perhaps I shall not kill him, perhaps I shall. I'm afraid he'll suddenly be so loathsome to me at that moment. I hate his double chin, his nose, his eyes, his shameless grin. I feel a personal repulsion. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what may be too much for me." This personal repulsion was growing unendurable. Mitya was beside himself. He suddenly pulled the brass pestle out of his pocket. "God was watching over me then," Mitya himself said afterwards. At that very moment Grigory waked up on his bed of sickness. Earlier in the evening he had undergone the treatment which Smerdyakov had described to Ivan. He had rubbed himself all over with vodka, mixed with a secret, very strong decoction, had drunk what was left of the mixture, while his wife repeated a certain prayer over him, after which he'd gone to bed. Marfa Ignatyevna had tasted the stuff too, and being unused to strong drink, slept like the dead beside her husband. But Grigory waked up in the night quite suddenly, and after a moment's reflection, though he immediately felt a sharp pain in his back, he sat up in bed. Then he deliberated again, got up, and dressed hurriedly. Perhaps his conscience was uneasy at the thought of sleeping while the house was unguarded in such perilous times. Smerdyakov, exhausted by his fit, lay motionless in the next room. Marfa Ignatyevna did not stir. "The stuff's been too much for the woman," Grigory thought, glancing at her, and groaning, he went out on the steps. No doubt he only intended to look out from the steps, for he was hardly able to walk. The pain in his back and his right leg was intolerable. But he suddenly remembered that he had not locked the little gate into the garden that evening. He was the most punctual and precise of men, a man who adhered to an unchangeable routine and habits that lasted for years. Limping and writhing with pain, he went down the steps and towards the garden. Yes, the gate stood wide open. Mechanically, he stepped into the garden. Perhaps he fancied something, perhaps caught some sound, and glancing to the left he saw his master's window open. No one was looking out of it then. "What's it open for? It's not summer now," thought Grigory, and suddenly at that very instant he caught a glimpse of something extraordinary before him in the garden. 40 paces in front of him a man seemed to be running in the dark. A sort of shadow was moving very fast. "Good Lord!" cried Grigory beside himself, and forgetting the pen in his bag he hurried to intercept the running figure. He took a short cut. Evidently he knew the garden better. The flying figure went towards the bath-house, ran behind it, and rushed to the garden fence. Grigory followed, not losing sight of him, and ran, forgetting everything. He reached the fence at the very moment the man was climbing over it. Grigory cried out, beside himself, pounced on him, and clutched his leg in his 2 hands. Yes, his foreboding had not deceived him. He recognized him. It was he, the monster, the parricide. "Parricide!" the old man shouted so that the whole neighbourhood could hear. But he had not time to shout more. He fell at once as though struck by lightning. Mitya jumped back into the garden and bent over the fallen man. In Mitya's hands was a brass pestle, and he flung it mechanically in the grass. The pestle fell 2 paces from Grigory, not in the grass but on the path, in a most conspicuous place. For some seconds he examined the prostrate figure before him. The old man's head was covered with blood. Mitya put out his hand and began feeling it. He remembered afterwards clearly that he'd been awfully anxious to make sure whether he'd broken the old man's skull or simply stunned him with a pestle. But the blood was flowing horribly, and in a moment Mitya's fingers were drenched with a hot stream. He remembered taking out of his pocket the clean white handkerchief with which he had provided himself for his visit to Madame Hohlakov, and putting it to the old man's head, senselessly trying to wipe the blood from his face and temples. But the handkerchief was instantly soaked with blood. "Good heavens, what am I doing it for?" thought Mitya, suddenly pulling himself together. "If I've broken his skull, how can I find out now, and what difference does it make now?" he added hopelessly. "If I've killed him, I've killed him. You've come to grief, old man, so there you must lie," he said aloud. And suddenly, turning to the fence, he vaulted over it into the lane and fell to running. The handkerchief soaked with blood he held, crushed up in his right fist, and as he ran he thrust it into the back pocket of his coat. He ran headlong, and the few passers-by who met him in the dark, in the streets, remembered afterwards that they had met a man running that night. He flew back again to the widow Morozov's house. Immediately after he had left it that evening, Fenya had rushed to the chief porter, Nazar Ivanovitch, and besought him, for Christ's sake, not to let the captain in again today or tomorrow. Nazar Ivanovitch promised, but went upstairs to his mistress, who had suddenly sent for him, and meeting his nephew, a boy of 20 who had recently come from the country, on the way up told him to take his place, but forgot to mention the captain. Mitya, running up to the gate, knocked. The lad instantly recognized him, for Mitya had more than once tipped him. Opening the gate at once, he let him in, and hastened to inform him with a good-humoured smile that Agrafena Alexandrovna is not at home now, you know. "Where is she then, Prohor?" asked Mitya, stopping short. "She set off this evening, some 2 hours ago, with Timofey to Mokroe." "What for?" cried Mitya. "That I can't say. To see some officer. Someone invited her, and horses were sent to fetch her." Mitya left him and ran like a madman to Fenya. Chapter 5. A sudden resolution. She was sitting in the kitchen with her grandmother. They were both just going to bed. Relying on Nazar Ivanovitch, they had not locked themselves in. Mitya ran in, pounced on Fenya, and seized her by the throat. "Speak at once! Where is she? With whom is she now? At Mokroe?" he roared furiously. Both the women squealed. I'll tell you, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, darling, I'll tell you everything directly. I won't hide anything," gabbled Fenya, frightened to death. "She's gone to Mokroe, to her officer." "What officer?" roared Mitya. "To her officer, the same one she used to know, the one who threw her over 5 years ago," cackled Fenya as fast as she could speak. Mitya withdrew the hands with which he was squeezing her throat. He stood facing her, pale as death, unable to utter a word, but his eyes showed that he realized it all all from the first word and guessed the whole position. Poor Fenya was not in a condition at that moment to observe whether he understood or not. She remained sitting on the trunk as she had been when he ran into the room, trembling all over, holding her hands out before her as though trying to defend herself. She seemed to have grown rigid in that position. Her wide-opened, scared eyes were fixed immovably upon him, and, to make matters worse, both his hands were smeared with blood. On the way, as he ran, he must have touched his forehead with them, wiping off the perspiration, so that on his forehead and his right cheek were blood-stained patches. Fenya was on the verge of hysterics. The old cook had jumped up and was staring at him like a mad woman, almost unconscious with terror. Mitya stood for a moment, then mechanically sank onto a chair next to Fenya. He sat, not reflecting, but, as it were, terror-stricken, benumbed. Yet everything was as clear as day. That officer, he knew about him, he knew everything perfectly. He had known it from Grushenka herself, had known that a letter had come from him a month before. So that for a whole month, this had been going on in secret from him, till the very arrival of this new man, and he'd never thought of him. But how could he? How could he not have thought of him? Why was it he had forgotten this officer like that, forgotten him as soon as he heard of him? That was the question that faced him like some monstrous thing, and he looked at this monstrous thing with horror, growing cold with horror. But suddenly, as gently and mildly as a gentle and affectionate child, he began speaking to Fenya as though he'd utterly forgotten how he'd scared and hurt her just now. He fell to questioning Fenya with an extreme preciseness, astonishing in his position, and though the girl looked wildly at his blood-stained hands, she, too, with wonderful readiness and rapidity, answered every question as though eager to put the whole truth and nothing but the truth before him. Little by little, even with a sort of enjoyment, she began explaining every detail, not wanting to torment him, but, as it were, eager to be of the utmost service to him. She described the whole of that day in great detail, the visit of Rakitin and Alyosha, how she, Fenya, had stood on the watch, how the mistress had set off, and how she'd called out of the window to Alyosha to give him, Mitya, her greetings, and to tell him to remember forever how she had loved him for an hour. Hearing of the message, Mitya suddenly smiled, and there was a flush of colour on his pale cheeks. At the same moment Fenya said to him, not a bit afraid now to be inquisitive, "Look at your hands, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, they're all over blood." "Yes," answered Mitya mechanically. He looked carelessly at his hands and at once forgot them and Fenya's question. He sank into silence again. 20 minutes had passed since he'd run in. His first horror was over, but evidently some new, fixed determination had taken possession of him. He suddenly stood up, smiling dreamily. "What's happened to you, sir?" said Fenya, pointing to his hands again. She spoke compassionately, as though she felt very near to him now in his grief. Mitya looked at his hands again. "That's blood, Fenya," he said, looking at her with a strange expression. "That's human blood, and my God, why was it shed? But, Fenya, there's a fence here." He looked at her as though setting her a riddle. "A high fence and terrible to look at, but at dawn tomorrow when the sun rises, Mitya will leap over that fence. You don't understand what fence, Fenya, and... never mind, you'll hear tomorrow and understand. And now goodbye. I won't stand in the way, I'll step aside, I know how to step aside. Live, my joy. You loved me for an hour, remember Mityenka Karamazov, so forever. She always used to call me Mityenka, do you remember?" And with those words he went suddenly out of the kitchen. Fenya was almost more frightened at this sudden departure than she had been when he ran in and attacked her. Just 10 minutes later Dmitri went into Pyotr Ilyitch Perotin, the young official with whom he'd pawned his pistols. It was by now 8:30, and Pyotr Ilyitch had finished his evening tea and had just put his coat on again to go to the metropolis to play billiards. Mitya caught him coming out. Seeing him with his face all smeared with blood, the young man uttered a cry of surprise. "Good heavens, what's the matter?" "I've come for my pistols," said Mitya, "and brought you the money, and thanks very much. I'm in a hurry, Pyotr Ilyitch. Please make haste." Pyotr Ilyitch grew more and more surprised. He suddenly caught sight of a bundle of banknotes in Mitya's hand, And what was more, he'd walked in holding the notes, as no one walks in and no one carries money. He had them in his right hand and held them outstretched as if to show them. Perotin's servant boy, who met Mitya in the passage, said afterwards that he walked into the passage in the same way, with the money outstretched in his hand, so he must have been carrying them like that even in the street. They were all rainbow-coloured 100-ruble notes, and the fingers holding them were covered with blood. When Pyotr Ilyitch was questioned later on as to the sum of money, he said that it was difficult to judge at a glance, but that it might have been 2,000, or perhaps 3, but it was a big, fat bundle. Dmitri Fyodorovitch, so he testified afterwards, seemed unlike himself too, not drunk, but as it were exalted, lost to everything, but at the same time, as it were, absorbed, as though pondering and searching for something and unable to come to a decision. He was in great haste, answered abruptly and very strangely, and at moments seemed not at all dejected, but quite cheerful. "But what is the matter with you? What's wrong?" cried Pyotr Ilyitch, looking wildly at his guest. "How is it that you're all covered with blood? Have you had a fall? Look at yourself." He took him by the elbow and led him to the glass. Seeing his blood-stained face, Mitya started and scowled wrathfully. "Damnation, that's the last straw," he muttered angrily, hurriedly changing the notes from his right hand to the left, and impulsively jerked the handkerchief out of his pocket. But the handkerchief turned out to be soaked with blood, too. It was the handkerchief he had used to wipe Grigori's face. There was scarcely a white spot on it, and it had not merely begun to dry, but had stiffened into a crumpled ball and could not be pulled apart. Mitya threw it angrily on the floor. "Oh, damn it," he said. "Haven't you a rag of some sort to wipe my face?" "So you're only stained, not wounded." "You'd better wash," said Pyotr Ilyitch. "Here's a washstand. I'll pour you out some water." "A washstand? Well, that's all right, but where am I to put this?" With the strangest perplexity he indicated his bundle of 100-ruble notes, looking inquiringly at Pyotr Ilyitch, as though it were for him to decide what he, Mitya, was to do with his own money. "In your pocket or on the table here. They won't be lost." "In my pocket, yes. In my pocket, all right. But I say that's all nonsense," he cried, as though suddenly coming out of his absorption. "Look here, let's first settle that business of the pistols. Give them back to me. Here's your money, because I'm in great need of them, and I haven't a minute to spare." And taking the topmost note from the bundle, he held it out to Pyotr Ilyitch. "But I shan't have change enough. Haven't you less?" "No," said Mitya, looking again at the bundle, and as though not trusting his own words, he turned over 2 or 3 of the topmost ones. "No, they're all alike," he added, and again he looked inquiringly at Pyotr Ilyitch. "How have you grown so rich?" the latter asked. "Wait, I'll send my boy to Plotnikov's. They close late, to see if they won't change it. Here, Misha," he called into the passage. "To Plotnikov's shop, first rate," cried Mitya, as though struck by an idea. "Misha," he turned to the boy as he came in, "look here, run to Plotnikov's and tell them that Dmitri Fyodorovitch sends his greetings, and will be there directly. But listen, tell them to have champagne, 3 dozen bottles ready before I come, and packed as it was to take to Mokroe. I took 4 dozen with me then," he added, suddenly addressing Pyotr Ilyitch. "They know all about it, don't you trouble, Misha." He turned again to the boy. "Stay, listen, tell them to put in cheese, Strasbourg pies, smoked fish, ham, caviar, and everything they've got, up to 100 rubles or 120 as before. But wait, don't let them forget dessert, sweets, pears, watermelons, 2 or 3 or 4. No, 1 melon's enough. And chocolate, candy, toffee, fondants. In fact, everything I took to Mokroe before, 300 rubles worth with the champagne. Let it be just the same again. And remember, Misha, if you are called Misha. His name is Misha, isn't it?" He turned to Pyotr Ilyitch again. "Wait a minute," Pyotr Ilyitch intervened, listening and watching him uneasily. "You'd better go yourself and tell him. He'll muddle it." "He will, I see he will. Misha, why, I was going to kiss you for the commission. If you don't make a mistake, there's 10 rubles for you. Run along, make haste. Champagne's the chief thing. Let them bring up champagne. And brandy, too, and red and white wine, and all I had then. They know what I had then." "But listen," Pyotr Ilyitch interrupted with some impatience. "I say, let him simply run and change the money and tell them not to close. And you go and tell them. Give him your note. Be off, Misha. Put your best leg forward." Pyotr Ilyitch seemed to hurry Misha off on purpose, because the boy remained standing with his mouth and eyes wide open, apparently understanding little of Mitya's orders, gazing up with amazement and terror at his blood-stained face and the trembling, blood-stained fingers that held the notes. "Well, now come and wash," said Pyotr Ilyitch sternly. "Put the money on the table or else in your pocket. That's right, come along, but take off your coat." And beginning to help him off with his coat, he cried out again, "Look, your coat's covered with blood, too. It's not the coat, it's only a little here on the sleeve, and that's only where the handkerchief lay. It must have soaked through. I must have sat on the handkerchief at Fenya's, and the blood's come through." Mitya explained at once with a childlike unconsciousness that was astounding. Pyotr Ilyitch listened, frowning. "Well, you must have been up to something. You must have been fighting with someone," he muttered. They began to wash. Pyotr Ilyitch held the jug and poured out the water. Mitya, in desperate haste, scarcely soaped his hands. They were trembling, and Pyotr Ilyitch remembered it afterwards. But the young official insisted on his soaping them thoroughly and rubbing them more. He seemed to exercise more and more sway over Mitya as time went on. It may be noted in passing that he was a young man of sturdy character. "Look, you haven't got your nails clean. Now rub your face, here, on your temples, by your ear. Will you go in that shirt? Where are you going? Look, all the cuff of your right sleeve is covered with blood." "Yes, it's all bloody," observed Mitya, looking at the cuff of his shirt. "Then change your shirt." "I haven't time, you see. Mitya went on with the same confiding ingenuousness, drying his face and hands on the towel and putting on his coat. "I'll turn it up at the wrist. It won't be seen under the coat. You see?" "Tell me now, what game have you been up to? Have you been fighting with someone? In the tavern again, as before? Have you been beating that captain again?" Pyotr Ilyitch asked him reproachfully. "Whom have you been beating now? Or killing, perhaps?" "Nonsense," said Mitya. "Why nonsense?" "Don't worry," said Mitya, and he suddenly laughed. "I smashed an old woman in the marketplace just now." "Smashed? An old woman?" "An old man," cried Mitya, looking Pyotr Ilyitch straight in the face, laughing and shouting at him, as though he were deaf. "Confound it! An old woman, an old man? Have you killed someone?" "We made it up. We had a row and made it up. In a place I know of. We parted friends. A fool. He's forgiven me. He's sure to have forgiven me by now. If he'd got up, he wouldn't have forgiven me." Mitya suddenly winked. "Only damn him, you know. I say, Pyotr Ilyitch, damn him. Don't worry about him. I don't want it just now," Mitya snapped out resolutely. "Whatever do you want to go picking quarrels with everyone for, just as you did with that captain over some nonsense? You've been fighting, and now you're rushing off on the spree. That's you all over. 3 dozen champagne. What do you want all that for?" "Bravo. Now give me the pistols. Upon my honour, I've no time now. I should like to have a chat with you, my dear boy, but I haven't the time, and there's no need. It's too late for talking. Where's my money? Where have I put it?" he cried, thrusting his hands into his pockets. "You put it on the table yourself. Here it is. Had you forgotten? Money's like dirt or water to you, it seems. Here are your pistols. It's an odd thing. At 6 o'clock you pledged them for 10 roubles, and now you've got thousands. 2 or 3, I should say." "3, you bet," laughed Mitya, stuffing the notes into the side pocket of his trousers. "You'll lose it like that. Have you found a gold mine?" "The mines! They're gold mines!" Mitya shouted at the top of his voice and went off in a roar of laughter. "Would you like to go to the mines, Perotin? There's a lady here who'll stump up 3,000 for you if only you'll go. She did it for me. She's so awfully fond of gold mines. Do you know Madame Hobolakov?" "I don't know her, but I've heard of her and seen her. Did she really give you the 3,000? Did she? Really?" said Pyotr Ilyitch, eyeing him dubiously. "As soon as the sun rises tomorrow, as soon as Phoebus, ever young, flies upwards, praising and glorifying God, you go to her, this Madame Hobolakov, and ask her whether she did stump up that 3,000 or not. Try and find out." "I don't know on what terms you are, since you say it so positively. I suppose she did give it to you. You've got the money in your hand, but instead of going to Siberia, you're spending it all. Where are you really off to now, eh?" "To Mokroe." "To Mokroe? But it's night." "Once the lad had all, now the lad has naught," cried Mitya suddenly. "Oh, naught. You say that, with all those thousands?" "I'm not talking about thousands, damn thousands. I'm talking of the female character. Fickle is the heart of woman, treacherous and full of vice. I agree with Ulysses, that's what he says." I don't understand you. Am I drunk? Well, not drunk, but worse. I'm drunk in spirit, Pyotr Ilyitch, drunk in spirit, but that's enough. What are you doing? Loading the pistol. I'm loading the pistol. Unfastening the pistol case, Mitya actually opened the powder horn and carefully sprinkled and rammed in the charge. Then he took the bullet, and before inserting it, held it in 2 fingers in front of the candle. "Why are you looking at the bullet?" asked Pyotr Ilyitch, watching him with uneasy curiosity. "No, a fancy." "Why, if you meant to put that bullet in your brain, would you look at it or not?" "Why look at it?" "It's going into my brain, so it's interesting to look and see what it's like. But that's foolishness, a moment's foolishness. Now that's done," he added, putting in the bullet and driving it home with the ramrod. "Pyotr Ilyitch, my dear fellow, that's nonsense, all nonsense. And if only you knew what nonsense. Give me a little piece of paper now." "Here's some paper." "No, a clean, new piece, writing paper." "That's right." And taking a pen from the table, Mitya rapidly wrote 2 lines, folded the paper in 4, and thrust it in his waistcoat pocket. He put the pistols in a case, locked it up, and kept it in his hand. Then he looked at Pyotr Ilyitch with a slow, thoughtful smile. "Now, let's go," he said. "Where are we going?" "No, wait a minute. Are you thinking of putting that bullet in your brain, perhaps?" Pyotr Ilyitch asked uneasily. "I was fooling about the bullet. I want to live. I love life. You may be sure of that. I love golden-haired Phoebus and his warm light. Dear Pyotr Ilyitch, do you know how to step aside?" "What do you mean by stepping aside?" "Making way. Making way for a dear creature and for one I hate. And to let the one I hate become dear, that's what making way means. And to say to them, 'God bless you, go your way, pass on, while you?" "That's enough, let's go." "On my word, I'll tell someone to prevent your going there," said Pyotr Ilyitch, looking at him. "What are you going to Mokroe for, now?" "There's a woman there, a woman. That's enough for you, you shut up." "Listen, though you're such a savage, I've always liked you. I feel anxious." "Hanks, old fellow, I'm a savage, you said. Savages. Savages. That's what I'm always saying, savages. Why, here's Misha, I was forgetting him." Misha ran in post-haste with a handful of notes and change, and reported that everyone was in a bustle at the Plotnikovs'. "They're carrying down the bottle and the fish and the tea. It'll all be ready directly." Mitya seized 10 roubles and handed it to Pyotr Ilyitch, then tossed another 10-rouble note to Misha. "Don't dare to do such a thing," cried Pyotr Ilyitch. "I won't have it in my house. It's a bad, demoralizing habit. Put your money away. Here, put it here. Why waste it? It would come in handy tomorrow, and I dare say you'll be coming to me to borrow 10 roubles again. Why do you keep putting the notes in your side pocket? Oh, you'll lose them. I say, my dear fellow, let's go to Mokroe together." "What should I go for?" "I say let's open a bottle and once and drink to life. I want to drink, and especially to drink with you. I've never drunk with you, have I?" "Very well, we can go to the Metropolis. I was just going there." "I haven't time for that. Let's drink at the Plotnikovs' in the back room. Shall I ask you a riddle?" "Oh, ask away." Mitya took the piece of paper out of his waistcoat pocket, unfolded it, and showed it. In a large, distinct hand was written, "I punish myself for my whole life I punish." "I certainly will speak to someone. I'll go at once," said Pyotr Ilyitch after reading the paper. "You won't have time, dear boy. Come and have a drink. March!" Plotnikov's shop was at the corner of the street, next door but one to Pyotr Ilyitch's. It was the largest grocery shop in our town, and by no means a bad one, belonging to some rich merchants. They kept everything that could be got in a Petersburg shop, grocery of all sorts, wines, bottled by the brothers Eliseyev, fruits, cigars, tea, coffee, sugar, and so on. There were 3 shop assistants and 2 errand boys always employed. Though our part of the country had grown poorer, the landowners had gone away, and trade had got worse, yet the grocery stores flourished as before, every year with increasing prosperity. There were plenty of purchasers for their goods. They were awaiting Mitya with impatience in the shop. They had vivid recollections of how he had bought, 3 or 4 weeks ago, wine and goods of all sorts to the value of several hundred roubles, paid for in cash. They would never have let him have anything on credit, of course. They remembered that then, as now, he had had a bundle of 100-rouble notes in his hand, and had scattered them at random, without bargaining, without reflecting, or caring to reflect what use so much wine and provisions would be to him. The story was told all over town that, driving off then with Grushenka to Mokroe, he had spent 3,000 in one night and the following day, and had come back from the spree without a penny. He had picked up a whole troop of gypsies, encamped in our neighbourhood at the time, who for 2 days got money without stint out of him while he was drunk, and drank expensive wine without stint. People used to tell, laughing at Mitya, how he had given champagne to grimy-handed peasants, and feasted the village women and girls on sweets and Strasbourg pies. Though to laugh at Mitya to his face was rather a risky proceeding, there was much laughter behind his back, especially in the tavern, at his own ingenuous public avowal that all he had got out of Grushenka by this escapade was permission to kiss her foot, and that was the utmost she had allowed him. By the time Mitya and Pyotr Ilyitch reached the shop, they found a cart with 3 horses harnessed abreast with bells, and with Andrei, the driver, ready waiting for Mitya at the entrance. In the shop they had almost entirely finished packing 1 box of provisions, and were only waiting for Mitya's arrival to nail it down and put it in the cart. Pyotr Ilyitch was astounded. "Where did this car come from in such a hurry?" he asked Mitya. "I met Andrei as I ran to you and told him to drive straight here to the shop. There's no time to lose. Last time I drove with Timofey, but Timofey now has gone on before me with the witch. Shall we be very late, Andrei?" "They'll only get there an hour at most before us, not even that may be. I got Timofey ready to start. I know how he'll go. Their pace won't be ours, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. How could it be they won't get there an hour earlier?" Andrei, a lanky, red-haired, middle-aged driver, wearing a full-skirted coat and with a caftan on his arm, replied warmly. 50 roubles for vodka if we're only an hour behind them. I warrant the time, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. They won't be half an hour before us, let alone an hour. Though Mitya bustled about seeing after things, he gave his orders strangely, as it were disconnectedly and inconsecutively. He began a sentence and forgot the end of it. Pyotr Ilyitch found himself obliged to come to the rescue. 400 roubles worth, not less than 400 roubles worth, just as it was then, commanded Mitya. 4 dozen champagne, not a bottle less. What do you want with so much? What's it for? Stay! Cried Pyotr Ilyitch. What's this box? What's in it? Surely there isn't 400 roubles worth here? The officious shop man began explaining with oily politeness that the first box contained only half a dozen bottles of champagne, and only the most indispensable articles, such as savouries, sweets, toffee, etc. But the main part of the goods ordered would be packed and sent off, as on the previous occasion, in a special cart, also with 3 horses, travelling at full speed, so that it would arrive not more than an hour later than Dmitri Fyodorovitch himself. Not more than an hour, not more than an hour. Put in more toffee and fondants. The girls there are so fond of it, Mitya insisted hotly. The fondants are all right, but what do you want with 4 dozen of champagne? 1 would be enough, said Pyotr Ilyitch, almost angry. He began bargaining, asking for a bill of the goods, and refused to be satisfied. But he only succeeded in saving 100 roubles. In the end it was agreed that only 300 roubles worth should be sent. "Well, you may go to the devil," said Pyotr Ilyitch on second thought. "What's it to do with me? Throw away your money since it's cost you nothing. This way, my economist, this way, don't be angry." Mitya drew him into a room at the back of the shop. "They'll give us a bottle here directly, we'll taste it. Pyotr Ilyitch, come along with me if you're a nice fellow, the sort I like." Mitya sat down on a wicker chair before a little table, covered with a dirty dinner napkin. Pyotr Ilyitch sat down opposite, and the champagne soon appeared, and oysters were suggested to the gentlemen. "First-class oysters, the last lot in." "Hang the oysters, I don't eat them, and we don't need anything," cried Pyotr Ilyitch, almost angrily. "There's no time for oysters," said Mitya, "and I'm not hungry. Do you know, friend," he said suddenly with feeling, I never have liked all this disorder. Who does like it? 3 dozens of champagne for peasants? Upon my word, that's enough to make anyone angry. That's not what I mean. I'm talking of a higher order. There's no order in me, no higher order. But that's all over. There's no need to grieve about it. It's too late, damn it. My whole life has been disorder, and once set it in order. Is that a pun, eh? You're raving, not making puns. Glory be to God in heaven. Glory be to God in me. That verse came from my heart once. It's not a verse, but a tear. I made it myself. Not while I was pulling the captain's beard, though. Why do you bring him in all of a sudden? Why do I bring him in? Foolery. All things come to an end. All things are made equal. That's the long and short of it. No, I keep thinking of your pistols. That's all foolery, too. Drink. And don't be fanciful. I love life. I've loved life too much. Shamefully much. Enough. Let's drink to life, dear boy. I propose the toast. Why am I pleased with myself? I'm a scoundrel, but I'm satisfied with myself. And yet I'm tortured by the thought that I'm a scoundrel, but satisfied with myself. I bless the creation. I'm ready to bless God and his creation directly, but I must kill one noxious insect for fear it should crawl and spoil life for others. Let us drink to life, dear brother. What can be more precious than life? Nothing. To life, and to one, queen of queens. Let's drink to life, and to your queen, too, if you like. They drank a glass each, although Mitya was excited and expansive. Yet he was melancholy, too. It was as though some heavy, overwhelming anxiety were weighing upon him. Misha, here's your Misha. Come, Misha, come here, my boy. Drink this glass to Phoebus, the golden-haired of tomorrow morn. What are you giving it him for? Cried Pyotr Ilyitch irritably. Yes, let me, I want to. Ech. Misha emptied the glass, bowed, and ran out. You'll remember it afterwards, Mitya remarked. Woman, I love woman. What is woman? The queen of creation. My heart is sad, Pyotr Ilyitch. Do you remember Hamlet? I'm very sorry, good Horatio. Alas, poor Yorick. Perhaps that's me, Yorick. Yes, I'm Yorick now, and a skull afterwards. Pyotr Ilyitch listened in silence. Mitya, too, was silent for a while. What dog's that you've got here? He asked the shopman casually, noticing a pretty little lap dog with dark eyes sitting in the corner. It belongs to Varvara Alexievna, the mistress, answered the clerk. She brought it and forgot it here. Must be taken back to her. I saw one like it in the regiment, murmured Mitya dreamily. Only that one had its hind leg broken. By the way, Pyotr Ilyitch, I wanted to ask you, have you ever stolen anything in your life? What a question. Oh, I didn't mean anything from somebody's pocket, you know. I don't mean government money. Everyone steals that, and no doubt you do, too. You go to the devil. I'm talking of other people's money, stealing straight out of a pocket, out of a purse, eh? I stole 20 kopecks from my mother when I was 9 years old. I took it off the table on the sly and held it tight in my hand. Well, and what happened? Oh, nothing. I kept it 3 days. Then I felt ashamed, confessed, and gave it back. And what then? Naturally, I was whipped. Why do you ask? Have you stolen something? I have, said Mitya, winking slyly. What have you stolen? Inquired Pyotr Ilyitch curiously. I stole 20 kopecks from my mother when I was 9 years old and gave it back 3 days after. As he said this, Mitya suddenly got up. Dmitri Fyodorovitch, won't you come now? Called Andrei from the door of the shop. You ready? We'll come. Mitya started. Few more last words, and Andrei, a glass of vodka at starting. Give me some brandy as well. That box, the one with the pistols, put under my seat. Goodbye, Pyotr Ilyitch. Don't remember evil against me. But you're coming back tomorrow, of course. Will you settle the little bill now? Cried the clerk, springing forward. Oh, yes, the bill, of course. He pulled the bundle of notes out of his pocket again, picked out 300 roubles, threw them on the counter, and ran hurriedly out of the shop. Everyone followed him out, bowing and wishing him good luck. Andrei, coughing from the brandy he just swallowed, jumped up on the box. But Mitya was only just taking his seat when suddenly, to his surprise, he saw Fenya before him. She ran up panting, clasped her hands before him with a cry, and plumped down at his feet. "Dmitri Fyodorovitch, dear, good Dmitri Fyodorovitch, don't harm my mistress, and it was I told you all about it. And don't murder him, he came first, he's hers. He'll marry Agrafena Alexandrovna now. That's why he's come back from Siberia. Dmitri Fyodorovitch, dear, don't take a fellow creature's life." "Tut, tut, tut! That's it, is it? So you're off there to make trouble," muttered Pyotr Ilyitch. "Now it's all clear as daylight. Dmitri Fyodorovitch, give me your pistols at once. If you mean to behave like a man," he shouted aloud to Mitya. "Do you hear, Dmitri?" "The pistols? Wait a bit, brother, I'll throw them into the pool on the road," answered Mitya. "Fenya, get up, don't kneel to me. Mitya won't hurt anyone, the silly fool won't hurt anyone again. But I say, Fenya," he shouted, after having taken his seat, "I hurt you just now, so forgive me and have pity on me. Forgive, a scoundrel. It doesn't matter if you don't. It's all the same now. Now then, Andrei, look alive, fly along full speed." Andrei whipped up the horses and the bells began ringing. "Goodbye, Pyotr Ilyitch, my last tear is for you." "He's not drunk, but he is babbling like a lunatic," Pyotr Ilyitch thought as he watched him go. He had half a mind to stay and see the cart packed with the remaining wines and provisions, knowing that they would deceive and defraud Mitya. But suddenly, feeling vexed with himself, he turned away with a curse and went to the tavern to play billiards. "He's a fool, though he's a good fellow," he muttered as he went. "I've heard of that officer, Grushenka's former flame. Well, if he's turned up... those pistols, damn it all, I'm not his nurse. Let them do what they like. Besides, it'll all come to nothing. They're a set of brawlers, that's all. They'll drink and fight and make friends again. They're not men who do anything real. What's he mean by, 'I'm stepping aside, I'm punishing myself, it'll come to nothing'? He shouted such phrases 1,000 times, drunk in the taverns. But now he's not drunk in spirit. They're fond of fine phrases, the villains. Am I his nurse? He must have been fighting, his face was all over blood. With whom? I shall find out at the metropolis. And his handkerchief was soaked in blood, it's still lying on my floor. Hang it." He reached the tavern in a bad humour, and at once made up a game. The game cheered him. He played a second game, and suddenly began telling one of his partners that Dmitri Karamazov had come in for some cash again, something like 3,000 roubles, and had gone to Mokroe again to spend it with Grushenka. This news roused singular interest in his listeners. They all spoke of it, not laughing, but with a strange gravity. They left off playing. 3,000? But where can he have got 3,000? Questions were asked. The story of Madame Holokov's present was received with scepticism. Hasn't he robbed his old father, that's the question. 3,000? There's something odd about it. He boasted aloud that he'd kill his father, we all heard him here, and it was 3,000 he talked about. Pyotr Ilyitch listened. All at once he became short and dry in his answers. He said not a word about the blood on Mitya's face and hands, though he had meant to speak of it at first. They began a third game, and by degrees the talk about Mitya died away. But by the end of the third game, Pyotr Ilyitch felt no more desire for billiards. He laid down the cue, and without having supper, as he had intended, he walked out of the tavern. When he reached the marketplace, he stood still in perplexity, wondering at himself. He realized that what he wanted was to go to Fyodor Pavlovitch's and find out if anything had happened there. On account of some stupid nonsense, as it's sure to turn out, am I going to wake up the household and make a scandal? Phew, damn it. Is it my business to look after them? In a very bad humour he went straight home, and suddenly remembered Fenya. Damn it all, I ought to have questioned her just now, he thought with vexation. I should have heard everything. And the desire to speak to her, and so find out, became so pressing and importunate that when he was halfway home he turned abruptly and went toward the house where Grushenka lodged. Going up to the gate he knocked. The sound of the knock in the silence of the night sobered him and made him feel annoyed. And no one answered him, everyone in the house was asleep. And I shall be making a fuss, he thought, with a feeling of positive discomfort. But instead of going away altogether, he fell to knocking again with all his might, filling the street with clamour. Not coming? Well, I will knock them up, I will," he muttered at each knock, fuming at himself. But at the same time he redoubled his knocks on the gate. Chapter 6. "I'm coming, too." But Dmitri Fyodorovitch was speeding along the road. It was a little more than 20 versts to Mokroe, but Andrei's 3 horses galloped at such a pace that the distance might be covered in an hour and a quarter. The swift motion revived Mitya. The air was fresh and cool. There were big stars shining in the sky. It was the very night, and perhaps the very hour, in which Alyosha fell on the earth and rapturously swore to love it for ever and ever. All was confusion in Mitya's soul, but although many things were goading his heart, at that moment his whole being was yearning for her, his queen, to whom he was flying to look on her for the last time. One thing I can say for certain, his heart did not waver for one instant. I shall perhaps not be believed when I say that this jealous lover felt not the slightest jealousy of this new rival, who seemed to have sprung out of the earth. If any other had appeared on the scene, he would have been jealous at once, and would perhaps have stained his fierce hands with blood again. But as he flew through the night, he felt no envy, no hostility even, for the man who had been her first lover. It is true he had not yet seen him. Here there was no room for dispute. It was her right and his. This was her first love, which after 5 years she had not forgotten. So she loved him only for those 5 years, and I? How do I come in? What right have I? Step aside, Mitya, and make way. What am I now? Now everything's over, apart from the officer. Even if he had not appeared, everything would be over. These words would roughly have expressed his feelings, if he had been capable of reasoning. But he could not reason at that moment. His present plan of action had arisen without reasoning. At Fenya's first words it had sprung from feeling, and been adopted in a flash, with all its consequences. And yet, in spite of his resolution, there was confusion in his soul, an agonizing confusion. His resolution did not give him peace. There was so much behind that tortured him. And it seemed strange to him at moments to think that he had written his own sentence of death with pen and paper. "I punish myself." And the paper was lying there in his pocket ready. The pistol was loaded. He had already resolved how, next morning, he would meet the first warm ray of golden-haired Phoebus. And yet he could not be quit of the past, of all that he had left behind, and that tortured him. He felt that miserably, and the thought of it sank into his heart with despair. There was one moment when he felt an impulse to stop Andrei, to jump out of the cart, to pull out his loaded pistol and to make an end of everything without waiting for the dawn. But that moment flew by like a spark. The horses galloped on, devouring space. And as he drew near his goal, again the thought of her alone, took more and more complete possession of his soul, chasing away the fearful images that had been haunting it. Oh, how he longed to look upon her, if only for a moment, if only from a distance. "She's now with him," he thought. "Now I shall see what she looks like with him, her first love, and that's all I want." Never had this woman, who was such a fateful influence in his life, aroused such love in his breast, such new and unknown feeling, surprising even to himself, a feeling tender to devoutness, to self-effacement before her. "I will efface myself," he said, in a rush of almost hysterical ecstasy. They'd been galloping nearly an hour. Mitya was silent, and though Andrei was, as a rule, a talkative peasant, he did not utter a word either. He seemed afraid to talk. He only whipped up smartly his 3 lean but mettlesome bay horses. Suddenly Mitya cried out in horrible anxiety, "Andrei, what if they're asleep?" This thought fell upon him like a blow. It had not occurred to him before. "It may well be that they're gone to bed by now, Dmitri Fyodorovitch." Mitya frowned as though in pain. Yes, indeed, he was rushing there, with such feelings, while they were asleep. She was asleep, perhaps, there too. An angry feeling surged up in his heart. "Drive on, Andrei! Whip them up! Look alive!" he cried, beside himself. "But maybe they're not in bed," Andrei went on after a pause. "Timofey said there were a lot of them there, at the station. Not at the posting station, but at Plastunov's at the inn, where they let out horses too." "I know. So you say there are a lot of them? How's that? Who are they?" cried Mitya, greatly dismayed at this unexpected news. "Well, Timofey was saying they're all gentlefolk. 2 from our town. Who they are I can't say. And there are 2 others, strangers, maybe more besides. I didn't ask particularly. They've set 2 playing cards, so Timofey said." "Cards? So maybe they're not in bed if they're at cards. It's most likely not more than 11. Quicker, Andrei, quicker!" Mitya cried again nervously. "May I ask you something, sir?" said Andrei after a pause. "Only I'm afraid of angering you, sir." "What is it?" "Why, Fenya threw herself at your feet just now and begged you not to harm her mistress and someone else too, so, you see, sir, it's I'm taking you there. Forgive me, sir, it's my conscience. Maybe it's stupid of me to speak of it." Mitya suddenly seized him by the shoulders from behind. "Are you a driver?" he asked frantically. "Yes, sir." "Then you know that one has to make way. What would you say to a driver who wouldn't make way for anyone but would just drive on and crush people? No, a driver mustn't run over people. One can't run over a man. One can't spoil people's lives. And if you have spoiled a life, punish yourself. If only you've spoilt, if only you've ruined anyone's life, punish yourself and go away." These phrases burst from Mitya almost hysterically. Though Andrei was surprised at him, he kept up the conversation. "Well, that's right, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, you're quite right. One mustn't crush or torment a man or any kind of creature, for every creature is created by God. Take a horse, for instance. For some folks, even among us drivers, drive anyhow. Nothing will restrain them, they just force it along." "To hell," Mitya interrupted, and went off into his abrupt, short laugh. "Andrei, simple soul." He seized him by the shoulders again. "Tell me, will Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov go to hell, or not? What do you think?" "I don't know, darling. Depends on you, for you are... Well, you see, sir, when the Son of God was nailed on the cross and died, he went straight down to hell from the cross and set free all sinners that were in agony. And the devil groaned, because he thought that he'd get no more sinners in hell. And God said to him then, 'Don't groan, for you shall have all the mighty of the earth, the rulers, the chief judges, and the rich men, and shall be filled up as you have been in all the ages till I come again.' Those were his very words. A peasant legend, capital. Whip up the left, Andrei. So you see, sir, who it is hell's for," said Andrei, whipping up the left horse. "You're like a little child, that's how we look on you. And though you're hasty-tempered, sir, yet God will forgive you for your kind heart. And you, do you forgive me, Andrei?" "What should I forgive you for, sir? You've never done me any harm." "No, for everyone, you here alone on the road, will you forgive me for everyone? Speak, simple peasant heart." "Oh, sir, I feel afraid of driving you, your talk is so strange." But Mitya did not hear. He was frantically praying and muttering to himself, "Lord, receive me with all my lawlessness, and do not condemn me. Let me pass by thy judgment, and do not condemn me, for I have condemned myself. Do not condemn me, for I love thee, O Lord. I am a wretch, but I love thee. If thou sendest me to hell, I shall love thee there, and from there I shall cry out that I love thee for ever and ever. But let me love to the end, here and now, for just 5 hours, till the first light of thy day. For I love the queen of my soul. I love her, and I cannot help loving her. Thou seest my whole heart. I shall gallop up, I shall fall before her, and say, 'You are right to pass on and leave me. Farewell, and forget your victim. Never fret yourself about me.'" "Mokroe!" cried Andrei, pointing ahead with his whip. Through the pale darkness of the night loomed a solid black mass of buildings, flung down, as it were, in the vast plain. The village of Mokroe numbered 2,000 inhabitants, but at that hour all were asleep, and only here and there a few lights still twinkled. "Drive on, Andrei, I come!" Mitya exclaimed feverishly. "They're not asleep," said Andrei again, pointing with his whip to the Plastonov's inn, which was at the entrance to the village. The 6 windows looking on the street were all brightly lighted up. "They're not asleep," Mitya repeated joyously. "Quicker, Andrei, gallop, drive up with a dash, set the bells ringing, let all know that I've come. I'm coming too!" Andrei lashed his exhausted team into a gallop, drove with a dash, and pulled up his steaming, panting horses at the high flight of steps. Mitya jumped out of the cart just as the innkeeper, on his way to bed, peeped out from the steps, curious to see who had arrived. "Trifon Borisovitch, is that you?" The innkeeper bent down, looked intently, ran down the steps, and rushed up to the guest with obsequious delight. "Dmitri Fyodorovitch, your honour, do I see you again?" Trifon Borissovitch was a thick-set, healthy peasant of middle height, with a rather fat face. His expression was severe and uncompromising, especially with the peasants of Mokroe, but he had the power of assuming the most obsequious countenance when he had an inkling that it was to his interest. He dressed in Russian style, with a shirt buttoning down on one side, and a full-skirted coat. He'd saved a good sum of money, but was forever dreaming of improving his position. More than half the peasants were in his clutches. Everyone in the neighbourhood was in debt to him. From the neighbouring landowners he bought and rented lands which were worked by the peasants, in payment of debts which they could never shake off. He was a widower with 4 grown-up daughters. One of them was already a widow and lived in the inn with her 2 children, his grandchildren, and worked for him like a charwoman. Another of his daughters was married to a petty official, and in one of the rooms of the inn, on the wall, could be seen among the family photographs a miniature photograph of this official in uniform and official epaulettes. The 2 younger daughters used to wear fashionable blue or green dresses, fitted tight at the back, and with trains a yard long, on church holidays or when they went to pay visits. But next morning they would get up at dawn, as usual, sweep out the rooms with a birch broom, empty the slops, and clean up after lodgers. In spite of the thousands of roubles he had saved, Trifon Borissovitch was very fond of emptying the pockets of a drunken guest, and remembering that not a month ago he had, in 24 hours, made 2, if not 300 roubles out of Dmitri, when he'd come on his escapade with Grushenka. He met him now with eager welcome, scenting his prey the moment Mitya drove up to the steps. "Dmitri Fyodorovitch, dear sir, we see you once more." "Stay, Trifon Borissovitch," began Mitya. "First and foremost, where is she?" "Agrafena Alexandrovna?" The innkeeper understood at once, looking sharply into Mitya's face. "She's here too. With whom?" "With whom?" "Some strangers. One is an official gentleman, a Pole, to judge from his speech. He sent the horses for her from here, and there's another with him, a friend of his, or a fellow traveller, there's no telling. They're dressed like civilians." "Well, are they feasting? Have they money?" "Poor sort of feast, nothing to boast of, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. Nothing to boast of? And who are the others?" "There are 2 gentlemen from the town. They've come back from Cherny and are putting up here. One's quite a young gentleman, a relative of Mr. Musov, he must be, but I've forgotten his name. And I expect you know the other, too, a gentleman called Maximov. He's been on a pilgrimage, so he says, to the monastery in the town. He's travelling with this young relation of Mr. Musov. Is that all?" "Yes." "Stay, listen, Trifon Borissovitch. Tell me the chief thing. What of her? How is she?" "Oh, she's only just come. She's sitting with them." "Is she cheerful? Is she laughing?" "No, I think she's not laughing much. She's sitting quite dull. She's combing the young gentleman's hair." "The Pole? The officer?" "He's not young, and he's not an officer either. Not him, sir. It's the young gentleman that's Mr. Musov's relation. I've forgotten his name." "Kalganov? That's it, Kalganov. All right, I'll see for myself. Are they playing cards?" "They have been playing, but they've left off. They've been drinking tea. The official gentleman asked for liqueurs." "Stay, Trifon Borissovitch, stay, my good soul. I'll see for myself. Now answer one more question. Are the gypsies here?" "You can have the gypsies now, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. The authorities have sent them away. But we've Jews that play the cymbals and the fiddle in the village, so one might send for them. They'd come." "Send for them. Certainly send for them," cried Mitya. "And you can get the girls together as you did then. Maria especially, Stepanida too, and Irina. 200 roubles for a chorus. Oh, for a sum like that I can get all the village together, though by now they're asleep. Are the peasants here worth such kindness, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, or the girls either? To spend a sum like that in such coarseness and rudeness, what's the good of giving a peasant a cigar to smoke, the stinking ruffian? And the girls are all lousy. Besides, I'll get my daughters up for nothing, let alone a sum like that. They've only just gone to bed. I'll give 'em a kick and set them singing for you. You gave the peasants champagne to drink the other day. Phew!" For all his pretended compassion for Mitya, Trifon Borissovitch had hidden 6 bottles of champagne on the last occasion, and had picked up 100-rouble note under the table, and it had remained in his clutches. "Trifon Borissovitch, I sent more than 1,000 flying last time I was here, do you remember?" "You did send it flying, I may well remember. You must have left 3,000 behind you. Well, I've come to do the same again, do you see?" And he pulled out his roll of notes and held them up before the innkeeper's nose. "Now listen and remember. In an hour's time the wine will arrive, savouries, pies, and sweets. Bring them all up at once. That box Andrei has got is to be brought up at once, too. Open it and hand champagne immediately. And the girls, we must have the girls, Maria especially." He turned to the cart and pulled out the box of pistols. "Here, Andrei, let's settle. Here's 15 roubles for the drive and 50 for vodka, for your readiness for your love. Remember, Karamazov." "I'm afraid, sir," faltered Andrei. "Give me 5 roubles extra, but more I won't take. Trifon Borisovich, bear witness. Forgive my foolish words." "What are you afraid of?" asked Mitya, scanning him. "Well, go to the devil if that's it," he cried, flinging him 5 roubles. "Now, Trifon Borisovich, take me up quietly and let me first get a look at them so that they don't see me. Where are they? In the blue room?" Trifon Borisovich looked apprehensively at Mitya, but at once obediently did his bidding. Leading him into the passage, he went himself into the first large room, adjoining that in which the visitors were sitting, and took the light away. Then he stealthily led Mitya in and put him in a corner in the dark, whence he could freely watch the company without being seen. But Mitya did not look long, and indeed he could not see them. He saw her. His heart throbbed violently, and all was dark before his eyes. She was sitting sideways to the table in a low chair, and beside her on the sofa was the pretty youth Kalganov. She was holding his hand and seemed to be laughing, while he, seeming vexed and not looking at her, was saying something in a loud voice to Maximov, who sat the other side of the table, facing Grushenka. Maximov was laughing violently at something. On the sofa sat he, and on a chair by the sofa there was another stranger. The one on the sofa was lolling backwards, smoking a pipe, and Mitya had an impression of a stoutish, broad-faced, short little man, who was apparently angry about something. His friend, the other stranger, struck Mitya as extraordinarily tall, but he could make out nothing more. He caught his breath. He could not bear it for a minute. He put the pistol case on a chest, and with a throbbing heart he walked, feeling cold all over, straight into the blue room to face the company. "Hi!" shrieked Grushenka, the first to notice him. Chapter 7. The First and Rightful Lover. With his long, rapid strides, Mitya walked straight up to the table. "Gentlemen," he said in a loud voice, almost shouting, yet stammering at every word. I'm all right. Don't be afraid," he exclaimed. There's nothing the matter." He turned suddenly to Grushenka, who had shrunk back in her chair towards Kalganov, and clasped his hand tightly. I'm coming too. I'm here till morning. Gentlemen, may I stay with you till morning? Only till morning, for the last time in this same room?" So he finished, turning to the fat little man with the pipe sitting on the sofa. The latter removed his pipe from his lips with dignity and observed severely, "Panye, we're here in private. There are other rooms."
"Why, it's you, Dmitri Fyodorovitch. What do you mean?" answered Kalganov suddenly. "Sit down with us. How are you?"
"Delighted to see you, dear and precious fellow. I always thought a lot of you."
Mitya responded joyfully and eagerly, at once holding out his hand across the table. "Aye, how tight you squeeze. You've quite broken my fingers," laughed Kalganov. "He always squeezes like that, always," Grushenka put in gaily with a timid smile, seeming suddenly convinced from Mitya's face that he was not going to make a scene. She was watching him with intense curiosity and still some uneasiness. She was impressed by something about him, and indeed the last thing she expected of him was that he would come in and speak like this at such a moment.
"Good evening," Maximov ventured blandly on the left.
Mitya rushed up to him too.
"Good evening. You're here too. How glad I am to find you here too. Gentlemen,
He addressed the Polish gentleman with the pipe again, evidently taking him for the most important person present.
"I flew here. I wanted to spend my last day, my last hour, in this room, in this very room, where I, too, adored my queen. Forgive me, Panye," he cried wildly. "I flew here and vowed. Oh, don't be afraid, it's my last night. Let's drink to our good understanding. They'll bring the wine at once. I brought this with me."
Something made him pull out his bundle of notes.
"Allow me, Panye, I want to have music, singing, a revel as we had before, but the worm, the unnecessary worm, will crawl away and there'll be no more of him. I will commemorate my day of joy on my last night."
He was almost choking. There was so much he wanted to say, but strange exclamations were all that came from his lips.
The Pole gazed fixedly at him with the bundle of notes in his hand, looked at Grushenka, and was in evident perplexity. "If my sovereign lady is permitting—" he was beginning.
"What does my sovereign mean? Sovereign, I suppose," interrupted Grushenka. "I can't help laughing at you the way you talk. Sit down, Mitya. What are you talking about? Don't frighten us, please. You won't frighten us, will you? If you weren't, I'm glad to see you."
Me frighten you?" cried Mitya, flinging up his hands. "Oh, pass me by, go your way, I won't hinder you." And suddenly he surprised them all, and no doubt himself as well, by flinging himself on a chair and bursting into tears, turning his head away to the opposite wall, while his arms clasped the back of the chair tight as though embracing it.
"Come, come, what a fellow you are!" cried Grushenka reproachfully. "That's just how he comes to see me. He begins talking, and I can't make out what he means. He cried like that once before, and now he's crying again. It's shameful. Why are you crying? As though you had anything to cry for," she added enigmatically, emphasizing each word with some irritability.
"I'm not crying. Well, good evening."
He instantly turned round in his chair and suddenly laughed. Not his abrupt wooden laugh, but a long, quivering, inaudible, nervous laugh. "Well, there you are again. Come, cheer up, Grushenka said to him persuasively. "I'm very glad you've come, very glad, Mitya. Do you hear? I'm very glad. I want him to stay here with us," she said peremptorily, addressing the whole company, though her words were obviously meant for the man sitting on the sofa. I wish it, and if he goes away I shall go too," she added with flashing eyes.
"What my queen commands is law," pronounced the Pole, gallantly kissing Grushenka's hands. "I beg you, panie, to join our company," he added politely, addressing Mitya.
Mitya was jumping up with the obvious intention of delivering another tirade, but the words did not come.
"Let's drink, panie," he blurted out instead of making a speech. Everyone laughed.
"Good heavens, I thought he was going to begin again," Grushenka exclaimed nervously. "Do you hear, Mitya?" she went on insistently. "Don't prance about, but it's nice you brought the champagne. I want some myself, and I can't bear liqueurs. And best of all, you've come yourself. We were fearfully dull here. You've come for a spree again, I suppose. But put your money in your pocket. Where did you get such a lot?"
Mitya had been all this time holding in his hand the crumpled bundle of notes, on which the eyes of all, especially of the Poles, were fixed. In confusion he thrust them hurriedly into his pocket. He flushed. At that moment the innkeeper brought in an uncorked bottle of champagne, and glasses on a tray. Mitya snatched up the bottle, but he was so bewildered that he did not know what to do with it. Kalganov took it from him and poured out the champagne. Another bottle!" Mitya cried to the innkeeper, and forgetting to clink glasses with the Pole, whom he had so solemnly invited to drink to their good understanding, he drank off his glass without waiting for anyone else. His whole countenance suddenly changed. The solemn and tragic expression with which it entered vanished completely, and a look of something childlike came into his face. He seemed to have become suddenly gentle and subdued. He looked shyly and happily at everyone, with a continual, nervous little laugh, and the blissful expression of a dog who had done wrong, been punished, and forgiven. He seemed to have forgotten everything, and was looking round at everyone with a childlike smile of delight. He looked at Grushenka, laughing continually, and bringing his chair close up to her. By degrees he had gained some idea of the two Poles, though he had formed no definite conception of them yet. The Pole on the sofa struck him by his dignified demeanour and his Polish accent, and above all by his pipe. "Well, what of it? It's a good thing he's smoking a pipe," he reflected. The Pole's puffy, middle-aged face, with its tiny nose, and two very thin, pointed, dyed, and impudent-looking moustaches, had not so far aroused the faintest doubts in Mitya. He was not even particularly struck by the Pole's absurd wig made in Siberia, with love-locks foolishly combed forward over the temples. "I suppose it's all right since he wears a wig," he went on, musing blissfully. The other, younger Pole, who was staring insolently and defiantly at the company, and listening to the conversation with silent contempt, still only impressed Mitya by his great height, which was in striking contrast to the Pole on the sofa. If he stood up, he'd be 6'3". The thought flitted through Mitya's mind. It occurred to him, too, that this Pole must be the friend of the other, as it were, a bodyguard, and no doubt the big Pole was at the disposal of the little Pole with the pipe. But this all seemed to Mitya perfectly right and not to be questioned. In his mood of dog-like submissiveness, all feeling of rivalry had died away. Grushenka's mood and the enigmatic tone of some of her words he completely failed to grasp. All he understood with thrilling heart was that she was kind to him, that she had forgiven him and made him sit by her. He was beside himself with delight, watching her sip her glass of champagne. The silence of the company seemed somehow to strike him, however, and he looked round at everyone with expectant eyes. "Why are we sitting here, though, gentlemen? Why don't you begin doing something?" his smiling eyes seemed to ask. "He keeps talking nonsense, and we were all laughing," Kalganov began suddenly, as though divining his thoughts, and pointing to Maximov. Mitya immediately stared at Kalganov and then at Maximov. "He's talking nonsense?" He laughed, his short, wooden laugh, seeming suddenly delighted at something. "Ha, ha, ha! Yes, would you believe it? He will have it that all our cavalry officers in the 20s married Polish women. That's awful rot, isn't it?" "Polish women?" repeated Mitya, perfectly ecstatic. Kalganov was well aware of Mitya's attitude to Grushenka, and he guessed about the Pole, too. But that did not much interest him, perhaps did not interest him at all. What he was interested in was Maximov. He had come here with Maximov by chance, and he met the Poles here at the inn for the first time in his life. Grushenka he knew before, and had once been with someone to see her, but she had not taken to him. But here she looked at him very affectionately. Before Mitya's arrival she had been making much of him, but he seemed somehow to be unmoved by it. He was a boy, not over 20, dressed like a dandy, with a very charming, fair-skinned face, and splendid, thick, fair hair. From his fair face looked out beautiful, pale blue eyes, with an intelligent and sometimes even deep expression, beyond his age indeed, although the young man sometimes looked and talked quite like a child, and was not at all ashamed of it, even when he was aware of it himself. As a rule he was very wilful, even capricious, though always friendly. Sometimes there was something fixed and obstinate in his expression. He would look at you and listen, seeming all the while to be persistently dreaming over something else. Often he was listless and lazy, at other times he would grow excited, sometimes apparently over the most trivial matters. "Only imagine I've been taking him out with me for the last 4 days," he went on, indolently drawling his words, quite naturally, though without the slightest affectation. "Ever since your brother, do you remember, shoved him off the carriage and sent him flying? That made me take an interest in him at the time, and I took him into the country. But he keeps talking such rot I'm ashamed to be with him. I'm taking him back." "The gentleman has not seen Polish ladies and says what is impossible," the Pole with the pipe observed to Maximov. He spoke Russian fairly well, much better anyway than he pretended. If he used Russian words he always distorted them into a Polish form. "But I was married to a Polish lady myself," tittered Maximov. "But did you serve in the cavalry? You were talking about the cavalry. Were you a cavalry officer?" put in Kalganov at once. "Was he a cavalry officer indeed? Ha, ha!" cried Mitya, listening eagerly, and turning his inquiring eyes to each as he spoke, as though there were no knowing what he might hear from each. "No, you see," Maximov turned to him, "what I mean is that those pretty Polish ladies, when they dance the mazurka with our ulans, when one of them dances a mazurka with a ulan, she jumps on his knee like a kitten, a little white one, and the Pan father and Pan mother look on and allow it. They allow it, and next day the ulan comes and offers her his hand. That's how it is. Offers her his hand, hee. Maximov ended tittering. "The Pan is a lajdek," the tall Pole on the chair growled suddenly and crossed one leg over the other. Mitya's eye was caught by his huge greased boot, with its thick, dirty sole. The dress of both the Poles looked rather greasy. "Well, now it's lajdek. What's he scolding about?" said Grushenka, suddenly vexed. "Pani Agrippina, what the gentleman saw in Poland were servant girls and not ladies of good birth," the Pole with the pipe observed to Grushenka. "You can reckon on that," The tall Pole snapped contemptuously.
"What next? Let him talk. People talk, why hinder them? It makes it cheerful," Grushenka said crossly.
"I'm not hindering them, Pani," said the Pole in the wig with a long look at Grushenka, and relapsing into dignified silence he sucked his pipe again.
No, the Polish gentleman spoke the truth." Kalganov got excited again, as though it were a question of vast import. "He's never been in Poland, so how can he talk about it? I suppose you weren't married in Poland, were you?"
"No, in the province of Smolensk. Only a Ulan had brought her to Russia before that, my future wife, with her mamma and her aunt and another female relation with a grown-up son. He brought her straight from Poland and gave her up to me. He was a lieutenant in our regiment, a very nice young man. At first he meant to marry her himself, but he didn't marry her because she turned out to be lame."
"So you married a lame woman?"
cried Kalganov. "Yes, they both deceived me a little bit at the time, and concealed it. I thought she was hopping. She kept hopping. I thought it was for fun."
"So pleased she was going to marry you!" yelled Kalganov in a ringing, childish voice.
"Yes, so pleased, but it turned out to be quite a different cause. Afterwards, when we were married, after the wedding, that very evening, she confessed, and very touchingly asked forgiveness. 'I once jumped over a puddle when I was a child,' she said, 'and injured my leg.'"
Kalganov went off into the most childish laughter, almost falling on the sofa. Grushenka, too, laughed. Mitya was at the pinnacle of happiness.
"Do you know that's the truth? He's not lying now," exclaimed Kalganov, turning to Mitya.
"And do you know he's been married twice? It's his first wife he's talking about. But his second wife, do you know, ran away and is alive now."
"Is it possible?"
said Mitya, turning quickly to Maximov with an expression of the utmost astonishment.
"Yes, she did run away. I've had that unpleasant experience,"
Maximov modestly assented.
"With a monsieur, and what was worse, she'd had all my little property transferred to her beforehand. 'You're an educated man,' she said to me. 'You can always get your living.' She settled my business with that. A venerable bishop once said to me, 'One of your wives was lame, but the other was too light-footed.' He.
Listen, cried Kalganov, bubbling over. "If he's telling lies, and he often is, he's only doing it to amuse us all. There's no harm in that, is there? You know, I sometimes like him. He's awfully low, but it's natural to him, eh? Don't you think so? Some people are low from self-interest, but he's simply so from nature. Only fancy, he claims— he was arguing about it all the way yesterday— that Gogol wrote Dead Souls about him. Do you remember there's a landowner called Maximov in it, whom Nozdryov thrashed? He was charged, you remember, for inflicting bodily injury with rods on the landowner Maximov in a drunken condition. Would you believe it, he claims that he was that Maximov, and that he was beaten. Now, can it be so? Chichikov made his journey at the very latest at the beginning of the 20s, so that the dates don't fit. He couldn't have been thrashed then. He couldn't, could he?" It was difficult to imagine what Kalganov was excited about, but his excitement was genuine. Mitya followed his lead without protest.
"Well, but if they did thrash him," he cried, laughing. "It is not that they thrashed me exactly, but what I mean is—"
put in Maximov.
"What do you mean? Either they thrashed you or they didn't." "What o'clock is it, Panie?"
the Pole with the pipe asked his tall friend with a bored expression. The other shrugged his shoulders in reply. Neither of them had a watch. "Why not talk? Let other people talk. Mustn't other people talk because you're bored?" Grushenka flew at him with evident intention of finding fault.
Something seemed for the first time to flash upon Mitya's mind. This time the Pole answered with unmistakable irritability. "Panie, I didn't oppose it. I didn't say anything."
"All right, then. Come, tell us your story," Grushenka cried to Maximov. "Why are you all so silent?"
"There's nothing to tell. It's all so foolish," answered Maximov at once with evident satisfaction, mincing a little. "Besides, all that's by way of allegory in Gogol, for he's made all the names have a meaning. Nozdryov was really called Nosov, and Kuvshinikov had quite a different name. He was called Shkvornev. Fenardi really was called Fenardi, only he wasn't an Italian but a Russian. And Mamselle Fenardi was a pretty girl with her pretty little legs in tights, and she had a little short skirt with spangles, and she kept turning round and round, only not for 4 hours, but for 4 minutes only, and she bewitched everyone."
"But what were you beaten for?" cried Kalganov.
"For Piron,"
answered Maximov.
"What Piron?" cried Mitya. The famous French writer Piron. We were all drinking, then a big party of us in a tavern at that very fair. They'd invited me, and first of all I began quoting epigrams. 'Is that you, Boileau? What a funny get-up!' And Boileau answers that he's going to a masquerade. 'That is to the baths, he, he.' And they took it to themselves, so I made haste to repeat another very sarcastic, well-known to all educated people. 'Yes, Sappho and Faun are we, but one grief is weighing on me. You don't know your way to the sea.' They were still more offended, and began abusing me in the most unseemly way for it. And, as ill luck would have it, to set things right, I began telling a very cultivated anecdote about Piron, how he was not accepted into the French Academy, and to revenge himself wrote his own epitaph, Si j'y Piron qui ne fut rien, pas même académicien. They seized me and thrashed me. But for what? What for? For my education. People can't thrash a man for anything." Maximov concluded briefly and sententiously. "Hey, that's enough. That's all stupid. I don't want to listen. I thought it would be amusing." Grushenka cut them short suddenly. Mitya started, and at once left off laughing. The tall Pole rose upon his feet, and, with the haughty air of a man bored and out of his element, began pacing from corner to corner of the room, his hands behind his back. "Ah, he can't sit still," said Grushenka, looking at him contemptuously. Mitya began to feel anxious. He noticed besides that the Pole on the sofa was looking at him with an irritable expression. "Panie!" cried Mitya, "let's drink! And the other pan, too, let's drink!" In a flash he'd pulled 3 glasses towards him and filled them with champagne. "To Poland, Panovier, I drink to your Poland!" cried Mitya. "I shall be delighted, Panie," said the Pole on the sofa with dignity and affable condescension, and he took his glass. "And the other pan, what's his name? Drink, most illustrious, take your glass," Mitya urged. "Pan Wróblewski," put in the Pole on the sofa. Pan Wróblewski came up to the table, swaying as he walked. "To Poland, Panovier!" cried Mitya, raising his glass. "Hurrah!" All 3 drank. Mitya seized the bottle and again poured out 3 glasses. "Now to Russia, Panovier, and let us be brothers." "Pour out some for us," said Grushenka. "I'll drink to Russia, too." "So will I," said Kalganov. "And I would, too, to Russia, the old grandmother," tittered Maximov. "Oh, oh!" cried Mitya. "Trifon Borisovich, some more bottles!" The other 3 bottles Mitya had brought with him were put on the table. Mitya filled the glasses. "To Russia! Hurrah!" he shouted again. All drank the toast except the Poles, and Grushenka tossed off her whole glass at once. The Poles did not touch theirs. "How's this, Panovier?" cried Mitya. "Won't you drink it?" Pan Wróblewski took the glass, raised it, and said with a resonant voice, "To Russia as she was before 1772. "Come, that's better," cried the other Pole, and they both emptied their glasses at once. "You're fools, you Panovier!" broke suddenly from Mitya. "Panie!" shouted both the Poles menacingly, setting on Mitya like a couple of cocks. Pan Wróblewski was specially furious. "Can one help loving one's own country?" he shouted. "Be silent, don't quarrel, I won't have any quarrelling," cried Grushenka imperiously, and she stamped her foot on the floor. Her face glowed, her eyes were shining. The effects of the glass she had just drunk were apparent. Mitya was terribly alarmed. "Panovier, forgive me, it was my fault, I'm sorry. Wróblewski, Panie Wróblewski, I'm sorry." "Hold your tongue, you, anyway. Sit down, you stupid." Grushenka scolded with angry annoyance. Everyone sat down. All were silent, looking at one another. "Gentlemen, I was the cause of it all," Mitya began again, unable to make anything of Grushenka's words. "Come, why are we sitting here? What shall we do to amuse ourselves again?" "Oh, it's certainly anything but amusing," Kalganov mumbled lazily. "Let's play faro again, as we did just now," Maximov tittered suddenly. "Faro! Splendid!" cried Mitya. "If only the Panovier—" "It's light, Panovier," the Pole on the sofa responded, as it were unwillingly. "That's true," assented Pan Wróblewski. "Light? What do you mean by light?" asked Grushenka. "Late, Panie, A late hour, I mean," the Pole on the sofa explained.
"It's always late with them. They can never do anything." Grushenka almost shrieked in her anger. "They're dull themselves, say they want others to be dull. Before you came, Mitya, they were just as silent and kept turning up their noses at me."
"My goodness," cried the Pole on the sofa. "I see you're not well disposed to me. That's why I'm gloomy. I'm ready, panie," added he, addressing Mitya. "Begin, panie," Mitya assented, pulling his notes out of his pocket and laying 200-ruble notes on the table. "I want to lose a lot to you. Take your cards. Make the bank." "We'll have cards from the landlord, panie," said the little Pole gravely and emphatically. "That's much the best way," chimed in Pan Wróblewski. "From the landlord? Very good, I understand. Let's get them from him. Cards!" Mitya shouted to the landlord. The landlord brought in a new, unopened pack, and informed Mitya that the girls were getting ready, and that the Jews with the symbols would most likely be here soon. But the cart with the provisions had not yet arrived. Mitya jumped up from the table and ran into the next room to give orders. But only 3 girls had arrived, and Maria was not there yet, and he did not know himself what orders to give and why he'd run out. He only told them to take out of the box the presents for the girls, the sweets, the toffee, and the fondants. "And vodka for Andrei! Vodka for Andrei!" he cried in haste. "I was rude to Andrei." Suddenly Maximov, who had followed him out, touched him on the shoulder. "Give me 5 rubles, he whispered to Mitya. "I'll stake something at faro too. "Capital, splendid. Take 10, here." Again he took all the notes out of his pocket and picked out one for 10 rubles. "And if you lose that, come again. Come again." "Very good," Maximov whispered joyfully, and he ran back again. Mitya too returned, apologizing for having kept them waiting. The Poles had already sat down and opened the pack. They looked much more amiable, almost cordial. The Pole on the sofa had lighted another pipe and was preparing to throw. He wore an air of solemnity. "To your places, gentlemen!" cried Pan Wróblewski. "No, I'm not going to play any more," observed Kalganov. "I've lost 50 rubles to them just now." "The Pan had no luck. Perhaps he'll be lucky this time," the Pole on the sofa observed in his direction. "How much in the bank, to correspond?" asked Mitya. "That's according, panie. Maybe 100, maybe 200, as much as you will stake." "1,000,000, laughed Mitya. "The Pan captain has heard of Pan Podvysotsky, perhaps." "What Podvysotsky?" "In Warsaw there was a bank, and anyone comes and stakes against it. Podvysotsky comes, sees 1,000 gold pieces, stakes against the bank. The banker says, 'Panie Podvysotsky, are you laying down the gold, or must we trust to your honor?' 'To my honor, panie,' says Podvysotsky. 'So much the better.' The banker throws the dice. Podvysotsky wins. 'Take it, panie,' says the banker, and pulling out the drawer he gives him 1,000,000. 'Take it, panie, this is your gain.' There was 1,000,000 in the bank. 'I didn't know that,' says Podvysotsky. 'Panie Podvysotsky,' said the banker, 'you pledged your honor and we pledged ours.' Podvysotsky took the 1,000,000. 'That's not true,' said Kalganov. 'Panie Kalganov, in gentlemanly society one doesn't say such things.' 'As if a Polish gambler would give away 1,000,000, cried Mitya, but checked himself at once. 'Forgive me, panie, it's my fault again. He would give away 1,000,000 for honor, for Polish honor. You see how I talk Polish? Ha, ha, ha! Here, I stake 10 rubles, the knave leads. And I put a ruble on the Queen of Hearts, the pretty little Panianochka. He, laughed Maximov, pulling out his queen, and as though trying to conceal it from everyone, he moved right up and crossed himself hurriedly under the table. Mitya won. The ruble won, too. 'A corner!' cried Mitya. 'I'll bet another ruble, a single stake,' Maximov muttered gleefully, hugely delighted at having won a ruble. 'Lost!' shouted Mitya. 'A double on the 7. The 7, too, was trumped. 'Stop!' cried Kalganov suddenly. 'Double! Double!' Mitya doubled his stakes.
and each time he doubled the stake, the card he doubled was trumped by the Poles. The ruble stakes kept winning.
"On the double!"
shouted Mitya furiously.
"You've lost 200, Panier. Will you stake another 100?
The Pole on the sofa inquired.
"What, lost 200 already? Then another 200, all doubles."
And pulling his money out of his pocket, Mitya was about to fling 200 rubles on the Queen, but Kalganov covered it with his hand. "That's enough!" he shouted in his ringing voice.
"What's the matter?"
Mitya stared at him. "That's enough. I don't want you to play any more. Don't."
"Why?"
"Because I don't. Hang it, come away, that's why. I won't let you go on playing." Mitya gazed at him in astonishment. "Give it up, Mitya, he may be right. You've lost a lot as it is," said Grushenka with a curious note in her voice. Both the Poles rose from their seats with a deeply offended air.
"Are you joking, Panier?"
said the short man, looking severely at Kalganov.
"How dare you?"
Pan Vrublevsky, too, growled at Kalganov. "Don't dare to shout like that," cried Grushenka. "Ah, you turkey cocks!" Mitya looked at each of them in turn, but something in Grushenka's face suddenly struck him, and at the same instant something new flashed into his mind, a strange new thought.
"Pani Agrippina,"
the little Pole was beginning, crimson with anger, when Mitya suddenly went up to him and slapped him on the shoulder.
"Most illustrious, 2 words with you. What do you want? In the next room I've 2 words to say to you, something pleasant. Very pleasant, you'll be glad to hear it."
The little Pan was taken aback and looked apprehensively at Mitya. He agreed at once, however, on condition that Pan Vrublevsky went with them.
"The bodyguard, let him come, and I want him too, I must have him," cried Mitya. "Much, Panovye."
"Where are you going?" asked Grushenka anxiously.
"We'll be back in 1 moment,"
answered Mitya. There was a sort of boldness, a sudden confidence shining in his eyes. His face had looked very different when he entered the room an hour before. He led the Poles not into the large room where the chorus of girls was assembling and the table was being laid, but into the bedroom on the right, where the trunks and packages were kept, and there were 2 large beds with pyramids of cotton pillows on each. There was a lighted candle on a small deal table in the corner. The small man and Mitya sat down to this table, facing each other, while the huge Vrublevsky stood beside them, his hands behind his back. The Poles looked severe, but were evidently inquisitive.
"What can I do for you, Panier?"
lisped the little Pole.
"Well, look here, Panier, I won't keep you long. There's money for you."
He pulled out his notes.
"Would you like 3,000? Take it and go your way."
The Pole gazed, open-eyed, at Mitya with a searching look.
3,000, Panier?"
He exchanged glances with Vrublevsky.
3, Panovye, 3. "Listen, Panier, I see you're a sensible man. Take 3,000 and go to the devil, and Vrublevsky with you, do you hear? But at once, this very minute and forever. You understand that, Panier? Forever. Here's the door. You go out of it. What have you got there? A greatcoat? A fur coat? I'll bring it out to you. They'll get the horses out directly, and then goodbye, Panier."
Mitya awaited an answer with assurance. He had no doubts. An expression of extraordinary resolution passed over the Pole's face.
"And the money, Panier?"
"The money, Panier. 500 rubles I'll give you this moment for the journey, and as a first instalment, and 2,500 tomorrow in the town. I swear on my honour I'll get it. I'll get it at any cost," cried Mitya. The Poles exchanged glances again. The short man's face looked more forbidding.
700, not 500, at once, this minute, cash down."
Mitya added, feeling something wrong.
"What's the matter, Panier? Don't you trust me? I can't give you the whole 3,000 straight off. If I give it, you may come back to her tomorrow. Besides, I haven't the 3,000 with me. I've got it at home in the town," faltered Mitya, his spirit sinking at every word he uttered. "Upon my word, the money's there, hidden."
In an instant, an extraordinary sense of personal dignity showed itself in the little man's face.
"What next?" he asked ironically. "For shame!"
And he spat on the floor. Pan Vrublevsky spat too.
"You do that, Panier,"
said Mitya, recognizing with despair that all was over,
Because you hope to make more out of Grushenka? You're a couple of capons, that's what you are. This is a mortal insult."
The little Pole turned as red as a crab, and he went out of the room briskly, as though unwilling to hear another word. Wróblewski swung out after him, and Mitya followed, confused and crestfallen. He was afraid of Grushenka, afraid that the pan would at once raise an outcry, and so indeed he did. The Pole walked into the room and threw himself in a theatrical attitude before Grushenka.
"Pani Agrippina, I've received a mortal insult!" he exclaimed.
But Grushenka suddenly lost all patience, as though they'd wounded her in the tenderest spot. "Speak Russian, she cried. "Not another word of Polish. You used to talk Russian. You can't have forgotten it in 5 years." She was red with passion.
"Pani Agrippina—"
"My name's Agrafena Grushenka. Speak Russian, or I won't listen." The Pole gasped with offended dignity and quickly and pompously delivered himself in broken Russian.
"Pani Agrafena, I came here to forget the past and forgive it, to forget all that has happened till today."
"Forgive? Come here to forgive me?" Grushenka cut him short, jumping up from her seat.
"Just so, Pani. I'm not pusillanimous. I'm magnanimous. But I was astounded when I saw your lovers. Pan Mitya offered me 3,000 in the other room to depart. I spat in the Pan's face."
"What? He offered you money for me?" cried Grushenka hysterically. "Is it true, Mitya? How dare you? Am I for sale?"
Panye, yelled Mitya. "She's pure and shining, and I've never been her lover. That's a lie."
"How dare you defend me to him?" shrieked Grushenka. "It wasn't virtue kept me pure, and it wasn't that I was afraid of Kuzma, but that I might hold up my head when I met him, and tell him he's a scoundrel. And did he actually refuse the money?"
He took it, cried Mitya. "Only he wanted to get the whole 3,000 at once, and I can only give him 700 straight off."
"I see. He heard I had money and came here to marry me."
"Pani Agrippina," cried the little Pole. "I'm a knight. I'm a nobleman, and not a lytek. I came here to make you my wife, and I find you a different woman, perverse and shameless."
"Oh, go back where you came from. I'll tell them to turn you out, and you'll be turned out," cried Grushenka, furious. "I've been a fool to have been miserable these 5 years. And it wasn't for his sake, it was my anger made me miserable. And this isn't he at all. Was he like this? It might be his father. Where did you get your wig from? He was a falcon, but this is a gander. He used to laugh and sing to me, and I've been crying for 5 years. Damned fool, abject, shameless I was." She sank back in her low chair and hid her face in her hands. At that instant the chorus of Mokroe girls began singing in the room on the left, a rollicking dance song.
"A regular Sodom,"
Wróblewski roared suddenly.
"Landlords, send the shameless hussies away."
The landlord, who had been for some time past inquisitively peeping in at the door, hearing shouts and guessing that his guests were quarrelling, at once entered the room.
"What are you shouting for? Do you want to split your throat?"
he said, addressing Wróblewski with surprising rudeness.
"Animal!"
bellowed Pan Wróblewski.
"Animal? And what sort of cards were you playing with just now? I gave you a pack and you hid it? You played with marked cards. I could send you to Siberia for playing with false cards. You know that? For it's just the same as false banknotes."
And going up to the sofa, he thrust his fingers between the sofa back and the cushion, and pulled out an unopened pack of cards.
"Here's my pack, unopened."
He held it up and showed it to all in the room.
"From where I stood I saw him slip my pack away and put his in place of it. You're a cheat and not a gentleman."
"And I twice saw the Pan change a card," cried Kalganov. "How shameful! How shameful!" exclaimed Grushenka, clasping her hands and blushing for genuine shame. "Good Lord, he's come to that."
"I thought so too," said Mitya.
But before he'd uttered the words, Wróblewski, with a confused and infuriated face, shook his fist at Grushenka, shouting,
"You low harlot!"
Mitya flew at him at once, clutched him in both hands, lifted him in the air, and in one instant had carried him into the room on the right, from which they had just come.
"I've laid him on the floor, there,"
he announced, returning at once, gasping with excitement.
"He's struggling, the scoundrel, but he won't come back, no fear of that."
He closed one half of the folding doors, and holding the other ajar, called out to the little Pole.
Most illustrious, will you be pleased to retire as well?" "My dear Dmitri Fyodorovitch," said Trifon Borisovitch, "make them give you back the money you lost. It's as good as stolen from you."
"I don't want my 50 roubles back," Kalganov declared suddenly.
"I don't want my 200 either," cried Mitya. "I wouldn't take it for anything. Let him keep it as a consolation."
"Bravo, Mitya, you're a trump, Mitya," cried Grushenka, and there was a note of fierce anger in the exclamation. The little Pan, crimson with fury but still mindful of his dignity, was making for the door, but he stopped short and said, suddenly addressing Grushenka, "Pani, if you want to come with me, come. If not, goodbye." And swelling with indignation and importance, he went to the door. This was a man of character. He had so good an opinion of himself that after all that had passed, he still expected that she would marry him. Mitya slammed the door after him. "Lock it," said Kalganov. But the key clicked on the other side. They'd locked it from within. "That's capital," exclaimed Grushenka relentlessly. "Serve them right." Chapter 8. Delirium. What followed was almost an orgy, a feast to which all were welcome. Grushenka was the first to call for wine. "I want to drink. I want to be quite drunk, as we were before. Do you remember, Mitya, do you remember how we made friends here last time?" Mitya himself was almost delirious, feeling that his happiness was at hand, but Grushenka was continually sending him away from her. "Go and enjoy yourself. Tell them to dance, to make merry. Let the stove and cottage dance, as we had it last time," she kept exclaiming. She was tremendously excited, and Mitya hastened to obey her. The chorus were in the next room. The room in which they had been sitting till that moment was too small, and was divided in two by cotton curtains, behind which was a huge bed with a puffy feather mattress and a pyramid of cotton pillows. In the 4 rooms for visitors there were beds. Grushenka settled herself just at the door. Mitya set an easy chair for her. She had sat in the same place to watch the dancing and singing the time before, when they'd made merry there. All the girls who had come had been there then. The Jewish band with fiddles and zithers had come too, and at last the long-expected cart had arrived with the wines and provisions. Mitya bustled about. All sorts of people began coming into the room to look on, peasants and their women, who had been roused from sleep and attracted by the hopes of another marvellous entertainment, such as they had enjoyed a month before. Mitya remembered their faces, greeting and embracing everyone he knew. He uncorked bottles and poured out wine for everyone who presented himself. Only the girls were very eager for the champagne. The men preferred rum, brandy, and above all hot punch. Mitya had chocolate made for all the girls, and ordered that 3 samovars should be kept boiling all night to provide tea and punch for everyone to help himself. An absurd, chaotic confusion followed, but Mitya was in his natural element, and the more foolish it became, the more his spirits rose. If the peasants had asked him for money at that moment, he would have pulled out his notes and given them away right and left. This was probably why the landlord, Trifon Borisovitch, kept hovering about Mitya to protect him. He seemed to have given up all idea of going to bed that night, though he drank little, only 1 glass of punch, and kept a sharp lookout on Mitya's interests after his own fashion. He intervened in the nick of time, civilly and obsequiously persuading Mitya not to give away cigars and Rhine wine, and above all money to the peasants, as he had done before. He was very indignant, too, at the peasant girls drinking liqueur and eating sweets. "They're a lousy lot, Dmitri Fyodorovitch," he said. "I'd give them a kick, every one of them, and they'd take it as an honour. That's all they're worth." Mitya remembered Andrei again and ordered punch to be sent out to him. "I was rude to him just now," he repeated with a sinking, softened voice. Kalganov did not want to drink, and at first did not care for the girls singing. But after he drank a couple of glasses of champagne, he became extraordinarily lively, strolling about the room, laughing and praising the music and the songs, admiring everyone and everything. Maximov, blissfully drunk, never left his side. Grushenka, too, was beginning to get drunk. Pointing to Kalganov, she said to Mitya, "What a dear, charming boy he is." And Mitya, delighted, ran to kiss Kalganov and Maximov.
Oh, great, were his hopes. She'd said nothing yet, and seemed indeed purposely to refrain from speaking. But she looked at him from time to time with caressing and passionate eyes. At last she suddenly gripped his hand and drew him vigorously to her. She was sitting at the moment in the low chair by the door. "How was it you came just now, eh? How you walked in? I was frightened. So you wanted to give me up to him, did you? Did you really want to?" "I didn't want to spoil your happiness," Mitya faltered blissfully. But she did not need his answer.
"Well, go and enjoy yourself,"
and sent him away once more.
"Don't cry, I'll call you back again."
He would run away, and she listened to the singing and looked at the dancing, though her eyes followed him wherever he went. But in another quarter of an hour she would call him once more, and again he would run back to her.
"Come, sit beside me. Tell me, how did you hear about me, and my coming here yesterday? From whom did you first hear it?"
And Mitya began telling her all about it, disconnectedly, incoherently, feverishly. He spoke strangely, often frowning, and stopped abruptly.
"What are you frowning at?"
she asked. "Nothing. I left a man ill there. I'd give 10 years of my life for him to get well, to know he was all right."
"Well, never mind him if he's ill. So you meant to shoot yourself tomorrow? What a silly boy, what for? I like such reckless fellows as you,"
she lisped, with a rather halting tongue.
"So you would go any length for me, eh? Did you really mean to shoot yourself tomorrow, you stupid? No, wait a little. Tomorrow I may have something to say to you. I won't say it today, but tomorrow. You'd like it to be today? No, I don't want today. Come, go along now, go and amuse yourself."
Once, however, she called him, as it were, puzzled and uneasy.
"Why are you sad? I see you're sad, yes, I see it,"
she added, looking intently into his eyes.
"Though you keep kissing the peasants and shouting, I see something. No, be merry. I'm merry, you be merry too. I love somebody here. Guess who it is? Ah, look, my boy has fallen asleep, poor dear, he's drunk."
She meant Kalganov. He was, in fact, drunk, and had dropped asleep for a moment sitting on the sofa. But he was not merely drowsy from drink. He felt suddenly dejected, or, as he said, bored. He was intensely depressed by the girls' songs, which, as the drinking went on, gradually became coarse and more reckless. And the dances were as bad. 2 girls dressed up as bears, and a lively girl called Stepanida, with a stick in her hand, acted the part of keeper, and began to show them. "Look alive, Maria, or you'll get the stick." The bears rolled on the ground at last in the most unseemly fashion, amid roars of laughter from the closely packed crowd of men and women.
"Well, let them, said Grushenka sententiously,
with an ecstatic expression on her face.
"When they do get a day to enjoy themselves, why shouldn't folks be happy?"
Kalganov looked as though he'd been besmirched with dirt.
"It's swinish, all this peasant foolery," he murmured, moving away. "It's the games they play when it's light all night in summer."
He particularly disliked one new song to a jaunty dance tune. It described how a gentleman came and tried his luck with the girls to see whether they would love him.
The master came to try the girls, would they love him, would they not?
But the girls could not love the master.
"He would beat me cruelly, and such love won't do for me."
Then a gypsy comes along, and he too tries. The gypsy came to try the girls, would they love him, would they not? But they couldn't love the gypsy either.
"He would be a thief, I fear, and would cause me many a tear."
And many more men came to try their luck, among them a soldier. The soldier came to try the girls, would they love him, would they not? But the soldier is rejected with contempt in 2 indecent lines, sung with absolute frankness and producing a furore in the audience. The song ends with a merchant. The merchant came to try the girls, would they love him, would they not? And it appears that he wins their love because
"The merchant will make gold for me, and his queen I'll gladly be."
Kalganov was positively indignant.
"That's just a song of yesterday," he said aloud. "Who writes such things for them? They might just as well have had a railwayman or a Jew come to try his luck with the girls. They'd have carried all before them." And almost as though it were a personal affront, he declared on the spot that he was bored, sat down on the sofa and immediately fell asleep. His pretty little face looked rather pale as it fell back on the sofa cushion. "Look how pretty he is," said Grushenka, taking Mitya up to him. "I was combing his hair just now. His hair's like flax and so thick." And bending over him tenderly, she kissed his forehead. Kalganov instantly opened his eyes, looked at her, stood up, and with the most anxious air inquired where was Maximov. "So that's who it is you want," Grushenka laughed. "Stay with me a minute. Mitya, run and find his Maximov." Maximov, it appeared, could not tear himself away from the girls, only running away from time to pour himself out a glass of liqueur. He had drunk 2 cups of chocolate. His face was red and his nose was crimson. His eyes were moist and mawkishly sweet. He ran up and announced that he was going to dance the sabotiere. "They taught me all those well-bred, aristocratic dances when I was little." Go with him, Mitya, and I'll watch from here how he dances," said Grushenka. No, I'm coming to look on too," exclaimed Kalganov, brushing aside in the most naive way Grushenka's offer to sit with him. They all went to look on. Maximov danced his dance, but it roused no great admiration in anyone but Mitya. It consisted of nothing but skipping and hopping, kicking out the feet, and at every skip Maximov slapped the upturned sole of his foot. Kalganov did not like it at all, but Mitya kissed the dancer. "Thanks. You're tired, perhaps. What are you looking for here? Would you like some sweets? A cigar, perhaps?" "A cigarette." "Don't you want a drink?" "I'll just have a liqueur." "Have you any chocolates?" "Yes, there's a heap of them on the table there. Choose one, my dear soul." "I like one with vanilla. For old people." "No, brother, we've none of that special sort." "I say," the old man bent down to whisper in Mitya's ear, "that girl there, little Maria, how would it be if you were to help me make friends with her?" "So that's what you're after." "No, brother, that won't do." "I'd do no harm to anyone," Maximov muttered disconsolately. "Oh, all right, they only come here to dance and sing, you know, brother. But damn it all, wait a bit. Eat and drink and be merry meanwhile. Don't you want money?" "Later on, perhaps," smiled Maximov. All right. Mitya's head was burning. He went outside to the wooden balcony which ran around the whole building on the inner side, overlooking the courtyard. The fresh air revived him. He stood alone in a dark corner and suddenly clutched his head in both hands. His scattered thoughts came together. His sensations blended into a whole and threw a sudden light into his mind. A fearful and terrible light. "If I'm to shoot myself, why not now?" passed through his mind. "Why not go for the pistols, bring them here, and here, in this dark, dirty corner, make an end?" Almost a minute he stood undecided. A few hours earlier, when he'd been dashing here, he was pursued by disgrace, by the theft he'd committed. And that blood. But yet it was easier for him then. Then everything was over. He'd lost her, given her up. She was gone for him. Oh, then his death sentence had been easier for him. At least it had seemed necessary, inevitable. For what had he to stay on earth for? But now, was it the same as then? Now one phantom, one terror at least, was at an end. That first rightful lover, that fateful figure, had vanished, leaving no trace. The terrible phantom had turned into something so small, so comic. It had been carried into the bedroom and locked in. It would never return. She was ashamed, and from her eyes he could see now whom she loved. Now he had everything to make life happy, but he could not go on living, he could not. Oh, damnation! Oh, God, restore to life the man I knocked down at the fence. Let this fearful cup pass from me. Lord, thou hast wrought miracles for such sinners as me. But what if the old man's alive? Oh, then, the shame of the other disgrace I would wipe away. I would restore the stolen money. I'd give it back. I'd get it somehow. No trace of that shame will remain except in my heart, forever. But no. Oh, impossible, cowardly dreams! Oh, damnation!
Yet there was a ray of light and hope in his darkness. He jumped up and ran back to the room. To her, his queen forever. Was not one moment of her love worth all the rest of life, even in the agonies of disgrace? This wild question clutched at his heart. To her alone, to see her, to hear her, to think of nothing, to forget everything, if only for that night, for an hour, for a moment. Just as he turned from the balcony into the passage, he came upon the landlord, Trifon Borisovich. He thought he looked gloomy and worried, and fancied he'd come to find him. "What is it, Trifon Borisovich? Are you looking for me?" "No, sir." The landlord seemed disconcerted. "Why should I be looking for you? Where have you been?" "Why do you look so glum? You're not angry, are you? Wait a bit. You shall soon get to bed. What's the time? It'll be 3 o'clock, past 3 it must be. We'll leave off soon, we'll leave off. Don't mention it, it doesn't matter. Keep it up as long as you like." "What's the matter with him?" Mitya wondered for an instant, and he ran back to the room where the girls were dancing. But she was not there. She was not in the blue room either. There was no one but Kalganov asleep on the sofa. Mitya peeped behind the curtain. She was there. She was sitting in the corner on a trunk, bent forward with her head and arms on the bed close by. She was crying bitterly, doing her utmost to stifle her sobs that she might not be heard. Seeing Mitya, she beckoned him to her, and when he ran to her, she grasped his hand tightly. "Mitya, Mitya, I loved him, you know. How I have loved him these 5 years, all that time. Did I love him, or only my own anger? No, him. It's a lie that it was my anger I loved and not him. Mitya, I was only 17 then. He was so kind to me, so merry. He used to sing to me, or so it seemed to a silly girl like me. And now, oh Lord, it's not the same man. Even his face is not the same. He's different altogether. I shouldn't have known him. I drove here with Timofey, and all the way I was thinking how I should meet him, what I should say to him, how we should look at one another. My soul was faint, and all of a sudden it was just as though he'd emptied a pail of dirty water over me. He talked to me like a schoolmaster, all so grave and learned. He met me so solemnly that I was struck dumb. I couldn't get a word in. At first I thought he was ashamed to talk before his great big Pole. I sat staring at him and wondering why I couldn't say a word to him now. It must have been his wife that ruined him. You know, he threw me up to get married. She must have changed him like that. Mitya, how shameful it is. Oh, Mitya, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed for all my life. Curse it, curse it. Curse those 5 years. And again she burst into tears, but clung tight to Mitya's hand and did not let it go. Mitya, darling, stay, don't go away. I want to say one word to you, she whispered, and suddenly raised her face to him. Listen, tell me who it is I love. I love one man here. Who is that man? That's what you must tell me. A smile lighted up her face that was swollen with weeping, and her eyes shone in the half-darkness. A falcon flew in and my heart sank. Fool, that's the man you love. That was what my heart whispered to me at once. You came in and all grew bright. What's he afraid of, I wondered, for you were frightened, you couldn't speak. It's not them he's afraid of. Could you be frightened of anyone? It's me he's afraid of, I thought, only me. So, Fenya told you, you little stupid, how I called to Alyosha out of the window that I'd love Mityenka for 1 hour, and that I was going now to love another. Mitya, how could I be such a fool as to think I could love anyone after you? Do you forgive me, Mitya? Do you forgive me or not? Do you love me? Do you love me? She jumped up and held him with both hands on his shoulders. Mitya, dumb with rapture, gazed into her eyes, at her face, at her smile, and suddenly clasped her tightly in his arms and kissed her passionately. You will forgive me for having tormented you. It was through spite I tormented you all. It was for spite I drove the old man out of his mind. Do you remember how you drank at my house one day and broke the wine glass?
I remember that, and I broke a glass today and drank to my vile heart. Mitya, my falcon, why don't you kiss me? He kissed me once, and now he draws back and looks and listens. Why, listen to me. Kiss me hard. That's right. If you love, well, then love. I'll be your slave now, your slave for the rest of my life. It's sweet to be a slave. Kiss me, beat me, ill-treat me, do what you will with me, and I do deserve to suffer. Stay, wait, afterwards. I won't have that. She suddenly thrust him away. Go along, Mitya, I'll come and have some wine. I want to be drunk. I'm going to get drunk and dance. I must. She tore herself away from him and disappeared behind the curtain. Mitya followed like a drunken man. Yes, come what may, whatever may happen now. For 1 minute I'd give the whole world, he thought. Grushenka did in fact toss off a whole glass of champagne at one gulp, and became at once very tipsy. She sat down in the same chair as before, with a blissful smile on her face. Her cheeks were glowing, her lips were burning, her flashing eyes were moist. There was passionate appeal in her eyes. Even Kalganov felt a stir at the heart and went up to her. "Did you feel how I kissed you when you were asleep just now?" she said thickly. "I'm drunk now. That's what it is. And aren't you drunk? And why isn't Mitya drinking? Why don't you drink, Mitya? I'm drunk and you don't drink." "I am drunk. I'm drunk as it is, drunk with you. And now I'll be drunk with wine too." He drank off another glass, and he thought it strange himself. That glass made him completely drunk. He was suddenly drunk, although till that moment he'd been quite sober. He remembered that. From that moment everything whirled about him as though he were delirious. He walked, laughed, talked to everybody without knowing what he was doing. Only one persistent burning sensation made itself felt continually, like a red-hot coal in his heart, he said afterwards. He went up to her, sat beside her, gazed at her, listened to her. She became very talkative, kept calling everyone to her, and beckoned to different girls out of the chorus. When the girl came up, she either kissed her or made the sign of the cross over her. In another minute she might have cried. She was greatly amused by the little old man, as she called Maximov. He ran up every minute to kiss her hands, each little finger, and finally he danced another dance to an old song which he sang himself. He danced with special vigour to the refrain. The little pig says, "Mwah, mwah, mwah." The little calf says, "Mwah, mwah, mwah." The little duck says, "Quack, quack, quack." The little goose says, "Quack, quack, quack." The hen goes strutting through the porch. "Ro, ro, ro," she'll say. "Ro, ro, ro," she'll say. "Give him something, Mitya," said Grushenka. "Give him a present. He's poor, you know. Ah, the poor, the insulted. Do you know, Mitya, I shall go into a nunnery. I really shall one day. Alyosha said something to me today that I shall remember all my life. Yes. But today let us dance. Tomorrow to the nunnery, but today we'll dance. I want to play today, good people, and what of it? God will forgive us. If I were God, I'd forgive everyone. My dear sinners, from this day forth I forgive you. I'm going to beg forgiveness. Forgive me, good people, a silly wench. I'm a beast, that's what I am. But I want to pray. I gave a little onion. Wicked as I've been, I want to pray. Mitya, let them dance, don't stop them. Everyone in the world is good. Everyone, even the worst of them. The world's a nice place. Though we're bad, the world's all right. We're good and bad, good and bad. Come, tell me, I've something to ask you. Come here, everyone, and I'll ask you, why am I so good? You know I am good. I'm very good. Come, why am I so good? So Grushenka babbled on, getting more and more drunk. At last she announced that she was going to dance too. She got up from her chair, staggering. "Mitya, don't give me any more wine. If I ask you, don't give it to me. Wine doesn't give peace. Everything's going round, the stove and everything. I want to dance. Let everyone see how I dance. Let them see how beautifully I dance." She really meant it. She pulled a white cambric handkerchief out of her pocket
and took it by one corner on her right hand to wave it in the dance. Mitya ran to and fro, the girls were quiet, and got ready to break into a dancing song at the first signal. Maximov, hearing that Grushenka wanted to dance, squealed with delight, and ran, skipping about in front of her, humming, "With legs so slim and sides so trim, and its little tail curled tight." But Grushenka waved her handkerchief at him and drove him away. "Shh, Mitya, why don't they come? Let everyone come to look on. Call them in, too, that were locked in. Why'd you lock them in? Tell them I'm going to dance. Let them look on, too." Mitya walked with a drunken swagger to the locked door and began knocking to the poles with his fist. "Ah, you! Podvysotsky's come, she's going to dance, she calls you." "Lydek," one of the Poles shouted in reply. "You're a Lydek yourself. You're a little scoundrel, that's what you are." "Leave off laughing at Poland," said Kalganov sententiously. He too was drunk. "Be quiet, boy. If I call him a scoundrel, it doesn't mean that I call all Poland so. One Lydek doesn't make a Poland. Be quiet, my pretty boy. Eat a sweetmeat." "Ach, what fellows, as though they were not men. Why won't they make friends?" said Grushenka, and went forward to dance. The chorus broke into, "Ah, my porch, my new porch." Grushenka flung back her head, half opened her lips, smiled, waved her handkerchief, and suddenly with a violent lurch stood still in the middle of the room, looking bewildered. I'm weak," she said in an exhausted voice. "Forgive me, I'm weak. I can't. I'm sorry." She bowed to the chorus and then began bowing in all directions. "I'm sorry. Forgive me." "The lady's been drinking. The pretty lady has been drinking," voices were heard saying. "The lady's drunk too much," Maximov explained to the girls, giggling. "Mitya, lead me away. Take me," said Grushenka helplessly. Mitya pounced on her, snatched her up in his arms, and carried the precious burden through the curtains. "Well, now I'll go," thought Kalganov, and walking out of the blue room he closed the two halves of the door after him. But the orgy in the larger room went on and grew louder and louder. Mitya laid Grushenka on the bed and kissed her on the lips. "Don't touch me," she faltered in an imploring voice. "Don't touch me till I'm yours. I told you I'm yours, but don't touch me. Spare me. With them here, with them close, you mustn't. He's here. It's nasty here." "I'll obey you. I won't think of it. I worship you," muttered Mitya. "Yes, it's nasty here. It's abominable." And still holding her in his arms, he sank on his knees by the bedside. "I know, though you're a brute, you're generous," Grushenka articulated with difficulty. "It must be honourable. It shall be honourable for the future. And let us be honest. Let us be good, not brutes, but good. Take me away. Take me far away, do you hear? I don't want it to be here, but far, far away." "Oh, yes, yes, it must be," said Mitya, pressing her in his arms. "I'll take you and we'll fly away. Oh, I'd give my whole life for 1 year only to know about that blood." "What blood?" asked Grushenka, bewildered. "Nothing," muttered Mitya through his teeth. "Grusha, you wanted to be honest, but I'm a thief. But I've stolen money from Katya. Disgrace, a disgrace." "From Katya? From that young lady? No, you didn't steal it. Give it her back. Take it from me. Why make a fuss? Now everything of mine is yours. What does money matter? We shall waste it anyway. Folks like us are bound to waste money. But we better go and work the land. I want to dig the earth with my own hands. We must work, do you hear? Alyosha said so. I won't be your mistress. I'll be faithful to you. I'll be your slave. I'll work for you. We'll go to the young lady and bow down to her together, so she may forgive us, and then we'll go away. And if she won't forgive us, we'll go anyway. Take her money and love me. Don't love her. Don't love her any more. If you love her, I shall strangle her. I shall put out both her eyes with a needle. I love you. I love only you. I'll love you in Siberia."
"Why, Siberia?" "Oh, never mind. Siberia if you like. I don't care. We'll work. The snow in Siberia. I love driving in the snow. I must have bells. Do you hear there's a bell ringing? Where's that bell ringing? There are people coming." Now it's stopped. She closed her eyes, exhausted, and suddenly fell asleep for an instant. There had certainly been the sound of a bell in the distance, but the ringing had ceased. Mitya let his head sink on her breast. He did not notice that the bell had ceased ringing, nor did he notice that the songs had ceased, and that instead of singing and drunken clamour, there was absolute stillness in the house. Grushenka opened her eyes. "What's the matter? Was I asleep?" "Yes, a bell. I've been asleep and dreamt I was driving over the snow with bells, and I dozed. I was with someone I loved, with you, and far, far away. I was holding you and kissing you, nestling close to you. I was cold, and the snow glistened. You know how the snow glistens at night when the moon shines. It was as though I was not on earth. I woke up, and my dear one is close to me. How sweet that is."
"Close to you," murmured Mitya, kissing her dress, her bosom, her hands. And suddenly he had a strange fancy. It seemed to him that she was looking straight before her, not at him, not into his face, but over his head with an intent, almost uncanny fixity. An expression of wonder, almost of alarm, came suddenly into her face.
"Mitya, who's that, looking at us?"
she whispered. Mitya turned and saw that someone had, in fact, parted the curtains and seemed to be watching them. And not one person alone, it seemed. He jumped up and walked quickly to the intruder. "Here, come to us. Come here," said a voice, speaking not loudly, but firmly and peremptorily. Mitya passed to the other side of the curtain and stood stock still. The room was filled with people, but not those who had been there before. An instantaneous shiver ran down his back, and he shuddered. He recognized all those people instantly. That tall, stout old man in the overcoat and forage cap with a cockade was the police captain, Mikhail Makarovitch, and that consumptive-looking, trim dandy who always has such polished boots, that was the deputy prosecutor. "He has a chronometer worth 400 roubles. He showed it to me." And that small young man in spectacles, Mitya forgot his surname, though he knew him, had seen him. He was the investigating lawyer from the School of Jurisprudence, who had only lately come to the town. And this man, the inspector of police, Mavrikyevich, a man he knew well. And those fellows with the brass plates on, why are they here? And those other two, peasants. And there at the door Kalganov with Trifon Borisovich. "Gentlemen, what's this for? Gentlemen?" began Mitya. But suddenly, as though beside himself, not knowing what he was doing, he cried aloud at the top of his voice, "I understand!" The young man in spectacles moved forward suddenly, and stepping up to Mitya began with dignity, though hurriedly. "We have to make, in brief, I beg you to come this way to the sofa. It is absolutely imperative that you should give an explanation." "The old man!" cried Mitya frantically. "The old man and his blood! I understand!" And he sank, almost fell, on a chair close by, as though he'd been mown down by a scythe. "You understand? He understands it, monster and parricide! Your father's blood cries out against you!" the old captain of police roared suddenly, stepping up to Mitya. He was beside himself, crimson in the face and quivering all over. "This is impossible!" cried the small young man. Mikhail Makarovitch, this won't do. I beg you will allow me to speak. I should never have expected such behaviour from you." "This is delirium, gentlemen, raving delirium," cried the captain of police. "Look at him, drunk at this time of night, in the company of a disreputable woman with the blood of his father on his hands. It's delirium. I beg you most earnestly, dear Mikhail Makarovitch, to restrain your feelings," the prosecutor said in a rapid whisper to the old police captain, "or I shall be forced to resort to—" But the little lawyer did not allow him to finish. He turned to Mitya and delivered himself in a loud, firm, dignified voice. Ex-Lieutenant Karamazov, it is my duty to inform you that you are charged with the murder of your father, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, perpetrated this night."
He said something more, and the prosecutor too put in something, but though Mitya heard them, he did not understand them. He stared at them all with wild eyes. Part 3, Book 9, The Preliminary Investigation. Chapter 1. The beginning of Perotin's official career. Pyotr Ilyich Perotin, whom we left knocking at the strong, locked gates of the widow Morozov's house, ended, of course, by making himself heard. Fenya, who was still excited by the fright she had had 2 hours before, and too much upset to go to bed, was almost frightened into hysterics on hearing the furious knocking at the gate. Though she had herself seen him drive away, she fancied that it must be Dmitri Fyodorovitch knocking again. No one else could knock so savagely. She ran to the house porter, who had already waked up and gone out to the gate, and began imploring him not to open it. But having questioned Pyotr Ilyich, and learned that he wanted to see Fenya on very important business, the man made up his mind at last to open. Pyotr Ilyich was admitted into Fenya's kitchen, but the girl begged him to allow the house porter to be present, because of her misgivings. He began questioning her, and at once learned the most vital fact, that is, that when Dmitri Fyodorovitch had run out to look for Grushenka, he had snatched up a pestle from the mortar, and that when he returned, the pestle was not with him, and his hands were smeared with blood. "And the blood was simply flowing, dripping from him, dripping," Fenya kept exclaiming. This horrible detail was simply the product of her disordered imagination. But although not dripping, Pyotr Ilyich had himself seen those hands stained with blood, and had helped to wash them. Moreover, the question he had to decide was not how soon the blood had dried, but where Dmitri Fyodorovitch had run with the pestle, or rather, whether it really was to Fyodor Pavlovitch's, and how he could satisfactorily ascertain. Pyotr Ilyich persisted in returning to this point, and though he found out nothing conclusive, yet he carried away a conviction that Dmitri Fyodorovitch could have gone nowhere but to his father's house, and that therefore something must have happened there. "And when he came back," Fenya added with excitement, "I told him the whole story, and then I began asking him, 'Why have you got blood on your hands, Dmitri Fyodorovitch?' And he answered that that was human blood, and that he'd just killed someone. He confessed it all to me and suddenly ran off like a madman. I sat down and began thinking, where's he run off to now like a madman? He'll go to Mokroe, I thought, and kill my mistress there. I ran out to beg him not to kill her. I was running to his lodgings, but I looked at Plotnikov's shop and saw him just setting off, and there was no blood on his hands then." Fenya had noticed this and remembered it. Fenya's old grandmother confirmed her evidence as far as she was capable. After asking some further questions, Pyotr Ilyich left the house, even more upset and uneasy than he had been when he entered it. The most direct and the easiest thing for him to do would have been to go straight to Fyodor Pavlovitch's to find out whether anything had happened there, and if so, what, and only to go to the police captain, as Pyotr Ilyich firmly intended doing, when he'd satisfied himself of the fact. But the night was dark. Fyodor Pavlovitch's gates were strong, and he would have to knock again. His acquaintance with Fyodor Pavlovitch was of the slightest, and what if, after he'd been knocking, they opened to him and nothing had happened? And Fyodor Pavlovitch, in his jeering way, would go telling the story all over the town, how a stranger, called Perotin, had broken in upon him at midnight to ask if anyone had killed him. It would make a scandal, and scandal was what Pyotr Ilyich dreaded more than anything in the world. Yet the feeling that possessed him was so strong that though he stamped his foot angrily and swore at himself, he set off again, not to Fyodor Pavlovitch's, but to Madame Holokov's. He decided that if she denied having just given Dmitri Fyodorovitch 3,000 roubles, he would go straight to the police captain, but if she admitted having given him the money, he would go home and let the matter rest till next morning. It is, of course, perfectly evident that there was even more likelihood of causing scandal by going at 11 o'clock at night to a fashionable lady, a complete stranger, and perhaps rousing her from her bed to ask her an amazing question, than by going to Fyodor Pavlovitch.
But that is just how it is sometimes, especially in cases like the present one, with the decisions of the most precise and phlegmatic people. Pyotr Ilyitch was by no means phlegmatic at that moment. He remembered all his life how a haunting uneasiness gradually gained possession of him, growing more and more painful and driving him on against his will. Yet he kept cursing himself, of course, all the way for going to this lady, but "I will get to the bottom of it, I will," he repeated for the 10th time, grinding his teeth, and he carried out his intention. It was exactly 11 o'clock when he entered Madame Holokov's house. He was admitted into the yard pretty quickly, but in response to his inquiry whether the lady was still up, the porter could give no answer, except that she was usually in bed by that time. "Ask at the top of the stairs. If the lady wants to receive you, she'll receive you. If she won't, she won't." Pyotr Ilyitch went up, but did not find things so easy here. The footman was unwilling to take in his name, but finally called a maid. Pyotr Ilyitch politely but insistently begged her to inform her lady that an official living in the town, called Perotin, had called on particular business, and that if it were not of the greatest importance he would not have ventured to come. "Tell her in those words exactly," he asked the girl. She went away. He remained, waiting in the entry. Madame Holikov herself was already in her bedroom, though not yet asleep. She had felt upset ever since Mitya's visit, and had a presentiment that she would not get through the night without the sick headache which always, with her, followed such excitement. She was surprised on hearing the announcement from the maid. She irritably declined to see him, however, though the unexpected visit at such an hour of an official living in the town, who was a total stranger, roused her feminine curiosity intensely. But this time Pyotr Ilyitch was as obstinate as a mule. He begged the maid most earnestly to take another message in these very words, that he had come on business of the greatest importance, and that Madame Holikov might have cause to regret it later if she refused to see him now. "I plunged headlong," he described it afterwards. The maid, gazing at him in amazement, went to take his message again. Madame Holikov was impressed. She thought a little, asked what he looked like, and learned that he was very well dressed, young, and so polite. We may note, parenthetically, that Pyotr Ilyitch was a rather good-looking young man, and well aware of the fact. Madame Holikov made up her mind to see him. She was in her dressing-gown and slippers, but she flung a black shawl over her shoulders. The official was asked to walk into the drawing-room, the very room in which Mitya had been received shortly before. The lady came to meet her visitor with a sternly inquiring countenance, and without asking him to sit down began at once with the question, "What do you want?" "I venture to disturb you, madame, on a matter concerning our common acquaintance, Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov," Perotin began. But he'd hardly uttered the name when the lady's face showed signs of acute irritation. She almost shrieked, and interrupted him in a fury. "How much longer am I to be worried by that awful man?" she cried hysterically. "How dare you, sir? How could you venture to disturb a lady who is estranged to you in her own house at such an hour, and to force yourself upon her to talk of a man who came here, to this very drawing-room, only 3 hours ago, to murder me, and went stamping out of the room, as no one would go out of a decent house? Let me tell you, sir, that I shall lodge a complaint against you, that I will not let it pass. Kindly leave me at once. I am a mother. I— Murder? Then he tried to murder you, too? Why, has he killed somebody else?" Madame Holikov asked impulsively. "If you would kindly listen, madame, for half a moment, I'll explain it all in a couple of words," answered Perotin firmly. "At 5 o'clock this afternoon, Dmitri Fyodorovitch borrowed 10 roubles from me, and I know for a fact he had no money. Yet at 9 o'clock he came to see me with a bundle of 100-rouble notes in his hand, about 2,000 or 3,000 roubles. His hands and face were all covered with blood, and he looked like a madman. When I asked him where he'd got so much money, he answered that he'd just received it from you, that you had given him a sum of 3,000 to go to the gold mines." Madame Holikov's face assumed an expression of intense and painful excitement. "Good God, he must have killed his old father!" she cried, clasping her hands. "I've never given him money, never! Oh, run, run, don't say another word, save the old man, run to his father, run!" "Excuse me, madame, then you did not give him money? You remember for a fact that you did not give him any money? No, I didn't. I refused to give it to him, for he could not appreciate it. He ran out in a fury, stamping. He rushed at me, but I slipped away. And let me tell you, as I wish to hide nothing from you now, that he positively spat at me. Can you fancy that? But why are we standing? Sit down. Excuse me, Or better, run. You must run and save the poor old man from an awful death. But if he's killed him already? Oh, good heavens, yes, then what are we to do now? What do you think we must do now?" Meantime she'd made Pyotr Ilyitch sit down, and sat down herself facing him. Briefly, but fairly clearly, Pyotr Ilyitch told her the history of the affair, that part of it at least which he had himself witnessed. He described, too, his visit to Fenya, and told her about the pestle. All these details produced an overwhelming effect on the distracted lady, who kept uttering shrieks and covering her face with her hands. "Would you believe it, I foresaw this. I have that special faculty. Whatever I imagine comes to pass, and how often I've looked at that awful man and always thought that man will end by murdering me, and now it's happened. That is, if he hasn't murdered me, but only his own father, it's only because the finger of God preserved me, and what's more, he was ashamed to murder me, because on this very place I put the holy icon from the relics of the holy martyr Saint Varvara on his neck. And to think how near I was to death at that minute, I went close up to him, and he stretched out his neck to me. Do you know, Pyotr Ilyitch, I think you said your name was Pyotr Ilyitch, I don't believe in miracles, but that icon and this unmistakable miracle with me now, that shakes me, and I'm ready to believe in anything you like. Have you heard about Father Zosima? But I don't know what I'm saying. And only fancy, with the icon on his neck, he spat at me. He only spat, it's true, he didn't murder me, and he dashed away. What shall we do? What shall we do now? What do you think?" Pyotr Ilyitch got up and announced that he was going straight to the police captain to tell him all about it, and leave him to do what he thought fit. "Oh, he's an excellent man, excellent. Mikhail Makarovitch, I know him, of course he's the person to go to. How practical you are, Pyotr Ilyitch. How well you've thought of everything. I should never have thought of it in your place." "Especially as I know the police captain very well, too," observed Pyotr Ilyitch, who still continued to stand, and was obviously anxious to escape as quickly as possible from the impulsive lady, who would not let him say good-bye and go away. "And be sure, she prattled on, "to come back and tell me what you see there, and what you find out, what comes to light, how they'll try him, and what he's condemned to. Tell me, we have no capital punishment, have we? But be sure to come, even if it's at 3 o'clock at night, at 4, at 4:30. Tell them to wake me, to shake me if I don't get up. Good heavens, I shan't sleep. But wait, hadn't I better come with you?" "No. But if you would write 3 lines with your own hand stating that you did not give Dmitri Fyodorovitch money, it might perhaps be of use, in case it's needed. To be sure." Madame Holikov skipped, delighted, to her bureau. "And you know, I'm simply struck, amazed at your resourcefulness, your good sense in such affairs. Are you in the service here? I'm delighted to think that you're in the service here." And still speaking, she scribbled on half a sheet of notepaper the following lines. "I've never in my life lent to that unhappy man, Dmitri Fyodorovitch Karamazov, for in spite of all he is unhappy, 3,000 roubles today. I've never given him money, never. That I swear by all that's holy. K. Holikov. Here's the note." She turned quickly to Pyotr Ilyitch. "Go, save him. It's a noble deed on your part." And she made the sign of the cross 3 times over him. She ran out to accompany him to the passage. "How grateful I am to you. Can't think how grateful I am to you for having come to me first. How is it I haven't met you before? I shall feel flattered at seeing you at my house in the future. How delightful it is that you're living here. Such precision, such practical ability. They must appreciate you. They must understand you. If there's anything I can do, believe me. Oh, I love young people. I'm in love with young people. The younger generation are the one prop of our suffering country, her one hope. Oh, go." But Pyotr Ilyitch had already run away, or she would not have let him go so soon. Yet Madame Holikov had made a rather agreeable impression on him, which had somewhat softened his anxiety at being drawn into such an unpleasant affair. Tastes differ, as we all know. She's by no means so elderly, he thought, feeling pleased. On the contrary, I should have taken her for her daughter. As for Madame Holikov, she was simply enchanted by the young man. Such sense, such exactness in so young a man, in our day, and all that with such manners and appearance. People say the young people of today are no good for anything, but here's an example. etc., etc. So she simply forgot this dreadful affair, and it was only as she was getting into bed that, suddenly recalling how near death she'd been, she exclaimed, "Ah, it is awful, awful!" But she fell at once into a sound, sweet sleep. I would not, however, have dwelt on such trivial and irrelevant details if this eccentric meeting of the young official with the by no means elderly widow had not subsequently turned out to be the foundation of the whole career of that practical and precise young man. His story is remembered to this day with amazement in our town, and I shall perhaps have something to say about it when I have finished my long history of the Brothers Karamazov. Chapter 2. The Alarm. Our police captain, Mikhail Makarovich Makarov, a retired lieutenant colonel, was a widower and an excellent man. He'd only come to us 3 years previously, but had won general esteem, chiefly because he knew how to keep society together. He was never without visitors, and could not have got on without them. Someone or other was always dining with him. He never sat down to table without guests. He gave regular dinners, too, on all sorts of occasions, sometimes most surprising ones. Though the fare was not recherché, it was abundant. The fish pies were excellent, and the wine made up in quantity for what it lacked in quality. The first room his guests entered was a well-fitted billiard-room, with pictures of English race-horses in black frames on the walls, an essential decoration, as we all know, for a bachelor's billiard-room. There was card-playing every evening at his house, if only at one table, but at frequent intervals all the society of our town, with the mammas and young ladies, assembled at his house to dance. Though Mikhail Makarovich was a widower, he did not live alone. His widowed daughter lived with him, with her 2 unmarried daughters, grown-up girls who had finished their education. They were of agreeable appearance and lively character, and though everyone knew they would have no dowry, they attracted all the young men of fashion to their grandfather's house. Mikhail Makarovich was by no means very efficient in his work, though he performed his duties no worse than many others. To speak plainly, he was a man of rather narrow education. His understanding of the limits of his administrative power could not always be relied upon. It was not so much that he failed to grasp certain reforms enacted during the present reign, as that he made conspicuous blunders in his interpretation of them. This was not from any special lack of intelligence, but from carelessness, for he was always in too great a hurry to go into the subject. "I have the heart of a soldier rather than of a civilian," he used to say of himself. He had not even formed a definite idea of the fundamental principles of the reforms connected with the emancipation of the serfs, and only picked it up, so to speak, from year to year, involuntarily increasing his knowledge by practice. And yet he was himself a landowner. Pyotr Ilyitch knew for certain that he would meet some of Mikhail Makarovich's visitors there that evening, but he didn't know which. As it happened, at that moment the prosecutor and Varvinsky, our district doctor, a young man, who had only just come to us from Petersburg after taking a brilliant degree at the Academy of Medicine, were playing whist at the police captain's. Ippolit Kirillovitch, the prosecutor — he was really the deputy prosecutor, but we always called him the prosecutor — was rather a peculiar man of about 35, inclined to be consumptive, and married to a fat and childless woman. He was vain and irritable, though he had a good intellect and even a kind heart. It seemed that all that was wrong with him was that he had a better opinion of himself than his ability warranted, and that made him seem constantly uneasy. He had, moreover, certain higher, even artistic, leanings towards psychology, for instance, a special study of the human heart, a special knowledge of the criminal and his crime. He cherished a grievance on this ground, considering that he'd been passed over in the service, and being firmly persuaded that in higher spheres he had not been properly appreciated, and had enemies. In gloomy moments he even threatened to give up his post and practice as a barrister in criminal cases. The unexpected Karamazov case agitated him profoundly. It was a case that might well be talked about all over Russia. But I am anticipating. Nikolai Parfenovitch Nelyudov, the young investigating lawyer, who had only come from Petersburg 2 months before, was sitting in the next room with the young ladies. People talked about it afterwards and wondered that all the gentlemen should, as though intentionally, on the evening of the crime, have been gathered together at the house of the executive authority. Yet it was perfectly simple and happened quite naturally. Ippolit Kirillovitch's wife had had toothache for the last 2 days, and he was obliged to go out to escape from her groans. The doctor, from the very nature of his being, could not spend an evening except at cards. Nikolai Parfenovitch Nelyudov had been intending for 3 days past to drop in that evening at Mikhail Makharovitch's, so to speak casually, so as slyly to startle the eldest granddaughter, Olga Mikhailovna, by showing that he knew her secret, that he knew it was her birthday, and that she was trying to conceal it on purpose, so as not to be obliged to give a dance. He anticipated a great deal of merriment, many playful jests about her age, and her being afraid to reveal it, about his knowing her secret and telling everybody, and so on. The charming young man was a great adept at such teasing. The ladies had christened him the naughty man, and he seemed to be delighted at the name. He was extremely well-bred, however, of good family, education, and feelings, and though leading a life of pleasure, his sallies were always innocent and in good taste. He was short and delicate-looking. On his white, slender little fingers he always wore a number of big, glittering rings. When he was engaged in his official duties, he always became extraordinarily grave, as though realizing his position and the sanctity of the obligations laid upon him. He had a special gift for mystifying murderers and other criminals of the peasant class during interrogation, and if he did not win their respect, he certainly succeeded in arousing their wonder. Pyotr Ilyitch was simply dumbfounded when he went into the police captain's. He saw instantly that everyone knew. They'd positively thrown down their cards, or were standing up and talking. Even Nikolai Parfenovitch had left the young ladies and ran in, looking strenuous and ready for action. Pyotr Ilyitch was met with the astounding news that old Fyodor Pavlovitch really had been murdered that evening in his own house, murdered and robbed. The news had only just reached them in the following manner. Marfa Ignatyevna, the wife of old Grigory, who had been knocked senseless near the fence, was sleeping soundly in her bed, and might well have slept till morning, after the draught she had taken. But all of a sudden she waked up, no doubt roused by a fearful epileptic scream from Smerdyakov, who was lying in the next room unconscious. That scream always preceded his fits, and always terrified and upset Marfa Ignatyevna. She could never get accustomed to it. She jumped up and ran half awake to Smerdyakov's room, but it was dark there, and she could only hear the invalid beginning to gasp and struggle. Then Marfa Ignatyevna herself screamed out and was going to call her husband, but suddenly realized that when she got up he was not beside her in bed. She ran back to the bedstead and began groping with her hands, but the bed was really empty. Then he must have gone out. Where? She ran to the steps and timidly called him. She got no answer, of course, but she caught the sound of groans far away in the garden in the darkness. She listened. The groans were repeated, and it was evident that they came from the garden. Good Lord, just as it was with Lizaveta Smerdyashchaya, she thought distractedly. She went timidly down the steps and saw that the gate into the garden was open. He must be out there, poor dear, she thought. She went up to the gate, and all at once she distinctly heard Grigory calling her by name. "Marfa! Marfa!" in a weak, moaning, dreadful voice. "Lord, preserve us from harm," Marfa Ignatyevna murmured, and ran towards the voice, and that was how she found Grigory. But she found him not by the fence where he'd been knocked down, but about 20 paces off. It appeared later that he'd crawled away on coming to himself, and probably had been a long time getting so far, losing consciousness several times. She noticed at once that he was covered with blood, and screamed at the top of her voice. Grigory was muttering incoherently. "He has murdered! His father murdered! Why scream, silly? Run! Fetch someone!" But Marfa continued screaming, and seeing that her master's window was open and that there was a candle alight in the window, she ran there and began calling Fyodor Pavlovitch. But peeping into the window, she saw a fearful sight. Her master was lying on his back, motionless on the floor. His light-coloured dressing gown and white shirt were soaked with blood. The candle on the table brightly lighted up the blood and the motionless dead face of Fyodor Pavlovitch. Terror-stricken, Marfa rushed away from the window, ran out of the garden, drew the bolt of the big gate, and ran headlong by the back way to the neighbour, Maria Kondratyevna. Both mother and daughter were asleep, but they waked up at Marfa's desperate and persistent screaming and knocking at the shutter. Marfa, shrieking and screaming incoherently, managed to tell them the main fact, and to beg for assistance. It happened that Foma had come back from his wanderings and was staying the night with them. They got him up immediately, and all three ran to the scene of the crime. On the way, Maria Kondratyevna remembered that at about 8 o'clock she heard a dreadful scream from their garden, and this was no doubt Grigory's scream, parricide, uttered when he caught hold of Mitya's leg. "Some one person screamed out and then was silent," Maria Kondratyevna explained as she ran. Running to the place where Grigory lay, the two women, with the help of Foma, carried him to the lodge. They lighted a candle, and saw that Smerdyakov was no better, that he was writhing in convulsions, his eyes fixed in a squint, and that foam was flowing from his lips. They moistened Grigory's forehead with water mixed with vinegar, and the water revived him at once. He asked immediately, "Is the master murdered?" Then Foma and both the women ran to the house, and saw this time that not only the window, but also the door into the garden was wide open, though Fyodor Pavlovitch had for the last week locked himself in every night, and did not allow even Grigory to come in on any pretext. Seeing that door open, they were afraid to go in to Fyodor Pavlovitch, for fear anything should happen afterwards. And when they returned to Grigory, the old man told them to go straight to the police captain. Maria Kondratyevna ran there and gave the alarm to the whole party at the police captain's. She arrived only 5 minutes before Pyotr Ilyitch, so that his story came not as his own surmise and theory, but as the direct confirmation, by a witness, of the theory held by all as to the identity of the criminal, a theory he had in the bottom of his heart refused to believe till that moment. It was resolved to act with energy. The deputy police inspector of the town was commissioned to take 4 witnesses, to enter Fyodor Pavlovitch's house, and there to open an inquiry on the spot, according to the regular forms, which I will not go into here. The district doctor, a zealous man, new to his work, almost insisted on accompanying the police captain, the prosecutor, and the investigating lawyer. I will note briefly that Fyodor Pavlovitch was found to be quite dead, with his skull battered in. But with what? Most likely with the same weapon with which Grigory had been attacked later, and immediately that weapon was found, Grigory, to whom all possible medical assistance was at once given, described in a weak and breaking voice how he'd been knocked down. They began looking with a lantern by the fence, and found the brass pestle dropped in a most conspicuous place on the garden path. There were no signs of disturbance in the room where Fyodor Pavlovitch was lying, but by the bed behind the screen they picked up from the floor a big and thick envelope with the inscription, "A present of 3,000 roubles for my angel Grushenka, if she is willing to come." And below had been added by Fyodor Pavlovitch, "For my little chicken." There were 3 seals of red sealing wax on the envelope, but it had been torn open and was empty. The money had been removed. They found also on the floor a piece of narrow pink ribbon with which the envelope had been tied up. One piece of Pyotr Ilyitch's evidence made a great impression on the prosecutor and the investigating magistrate, namely, his idea that Dmitri Fyodorovitch would shoot himself before daybreak, that he'd resolved to do so, had spoken of it to Pyotr Ilyitch, had taken the pistols, loaded them before him, written a letter, put it in his pocket, etc. When Pyotr Ilyitch, though still unwilling to believe it, threatened to tell someone so as to prevent the suicide, Mitya had answered, grinning, "You'll be too late." So they must make haste to Mokroe to find the criminal before he really did shoot himself. "That's clear, that's clear," repeated the prosecutor in great excitement. "That's just the way with mad fellows like that. I shall kill myself tomorrow, so I'll make merry till I die." The story of how he'd bought the wine and provisions excited the prosecutor more than ever. "Do you remember the fellow that murdered a merchant called Olsufyev, gentlemen? He stole 1,500, went at once to have his hair curled, and then, without even hiding the money, carrying it almost in his hand, in the same way he went off to the girls." All were delayed, however, by the inquiry, the search, and the formalities, etc., in the house of Fyodor Pavlovitch. It all took time, and so, 2 hours before starting, they sent on ahead to Mokroe the officer of the rural police, Mavrikyevich Shmertsov, who'd arrived in the town the morning before to get his pay. He was instructed to avoid raising the alarm when he reached Mokroe, but to keep constant watch over the criminal till the arrival of the proper authorities, to procure also witnesses for the arrest, police constables, and so on. Mavrikyevich did as he was told, preserving his incognito and giving no one but his old acquaintance Trifon Borisovich the slightest hint of his secret business. He had spoken to him just before Mitya met the landlord in the balcony, looking for him in the dark, and noticed at once a change in Trifon Borisovich's face and voice. So neither Mitya nor anyone else knew that he was being watched. The box with the pistols had been carried off by Trifon Borisovich and put in a suitable place. Only after 4 o'clock, almost at sunrise, all the officials, the police captain, the prosecutor, the investigating lawyer, drove up in 2 carriages, each drawn by 3 horses. The doctor remained at Fyodor Pavlovitch's to make a post-mortem next day on the body, but he was particularly interested in the condition of the servant, Smerdyakov. "Such violent and protracted epileptic fits, recurring continually for 24 hours, are rarely to be met with, and are of interest to science," he declared enthusiastically to his companions, and as they left they laughingly congratulated him on his find. The prosecutor and the investigating lawyer distinctly remembered the doctors saying that Smerdyakov could not outlive the night. After these long, but I think necessary explanations, we will return to that moment of our tale at which we broke off. Chapter 3. The Sufferings of a Soul, the First Ordeal. And so Mitya sat looking wildly at the people round him, not understanding what was said to him. Suddenly he got up, flung up his hands, and shouted aloud, "I'm not guilty! I'm not guilty of that blood! I'm not guilty of my father's blood! I meant to kill him, but I'm not guilty, not I!" But he'd hardly said this before Grushenka rushed from behind the curtain and flung herself at the police captain's feet. "It was my fault, mine, my wickedness," she cried in a heart-rending voice, bathed in tears, stretching out her clasped hands towards them. "He did it through me. I tortured him and drove him to it. I tortured that poor old man that's dead, too, in my wickedness, and brought him to this. It's my fault, mine first, mine most, my fault." "Yes, it's your fault. You're the chief criminal. You fury, you harlot, you're the most to blame," shouted the police captain, threatening her with his hand. But he was quickly and resolutely suppressed. The prosecutor positively seized hold of him. "This is absolutely irregular, Mikhail Makarovich," he cried. "You are positively hindering the inquiry. You're ruining the case." He almost gasped. "Follow the regular course, follow the regular course," cried Nikolai Parfenovitch, fearfully excited too. "Otherwise it's absolutely impossible."
"Charge us together," Grushenka cried frantically, still kneeling. "Punish us together. I will go with him now, if it's to death."
"Grusha, my life, my blood, my holy one!"
Mitya fell on his knees beside her and held her tight in his arms.
"Don't believe her," he cried. "She's not guilty of anything, of any blood, of anything."
He remembered afterwards that he was forcibly dragged away from her by several men, and that she was led out, and that when he recovered himself he was sitting at the table. Beside him and behind him stood the men with metal plates. Facing him on the other side of the table sat Nikolai Parfenovitch, the investigating lawyer. He kept persuading him to drink a little water out of a glass that stood on the table. "That will refresh you, that will calm you. Be calm, don't be frightened," he added extremely politely. Mitya, he remembered it afterwards, became suddenly intensely interested in his big rings, one with an amethyst and another with a transparent bright yellow stone of great brilliance.
and long afterwards he remembered with wonder how those rings had riveted his attention through all those terrible hours of interrogation, so that he was utterly unable to tear himself away from them and dismiss them as things that had nothing to do with his position. On Mitya's left side, in the place where Maximov had been sitting at the beginning of the evening, the prosecutor was now seated, and on Mitya's right hand, where Grushenka had been, was a rosy-cheeked young man in a sort of shabby hunting jacket, with ink and paper before him. This was the secretary of the investigating lawyer, who had brought him with him. The police captain was now standing by the window at the other end of the room, beside Kalganov, who was sitting there. "Drink some water," said the investigating lawyer softly for the 10th time. "I've drunk it, gentlemen, I have. But come, gentlemen, crush me, punish me, decide my fate," cried Mitya, staring with terribly fixed, wide-open eyes at the investigating lawyer. "So you positively declare that you are not guilty of the death of your father, Fyodor Pavlovitch?" asked the investigating lawyer, softly but insistently. "I'm not guilty. I am guilty of the blood of another old man, but not of my father's, and I weep for it. I killed the old man and knocked him down, but it's hard to have to answer for that murder with another, a terrible murder of which I'm not guilty. It's a terrible accusation, gentlemen, a knockdown blow. But who has killed my father? Who has killed him? Who can have killed him if I didn't? It's marvellous, extraordinary, impossible." "Yes, who can have killed him?" the investigating lawyer was beginning, but Ippolit Kirillovitch, the prosecutor, glancing at him, addressed Mitya. "You need not worry yourself about the old servant, Grigory Vasilevich. He is alive, he has recovered, and in spite of the terrible blows inflicted, according to his own and your evidence, by you, there seems no doubt that he will live, so the doctor says, at least." "Alive! He's alive!" cried Mitya, flinging up his hands. His face beamed. "Lord, I thank thee for the miracle thou hast wrought for me, a sinner and evildoer. That's an answer to my prayer I've been praying all night." And he crossed himself 3 times. He was almost breathless. "So from this Grigory we have received such important evidence concerning you that—" the prosecutor would have continued, but Mitya suddenly jumped up from his chair. "1 minute, gentlemen, for God's sake, 1 minute. I'll run to her. Excuse me at this moment, it's quite impossible," Nikolai Parfenovitch almost shrieked. He, too, leapt to his feet. Mitya was seized by the men with the metal plates, but he sat down on his own accord. "Gentlemen, what a pity. I wanted to see her for 1 minute only. I wanted to tell her that it has been washed away, it has gone, that blood that was weighing on my heart all night, and that I'm not a murderer now. Gentlemen, she is my betrothed," he said, ecstatically and reverently, looking round at them all. "Oh, thank you, gentlemen. Oh, in 1 minute you have given me new life, new heart. That old man used to carry me in his arms, gentlemen. He used to wash me in the tub when I was a baby, 3 years old, abandoned by everyone. He was like a father to me." "And so you," the investigating lawyer began. "Allow me, gentlemen, allow me 1 minute more," interposed Mitya, putting his elbows on the table and covering his face with his hands. "Let me have a moment to think. Let me breathe, gentlemen. All this is horribly upsetting, horribly. A man is not a drum, gentlemen." "Drink a little more water," murmured Nikolai Parfenovitch. Mitya took his hands from his face and laughed. His eyes were confident. He seemed completely transformed in a moment. His whole bearing was changed. He was once more the equal of these men, with all of whom he was acquainted, as though they'd all met the day before when nothing had happened at some social gathering. We may note in passing that on his first arrival Mitya had been made very welcome at the police captain's, but later, during the last month especially, Mitya had hardly called at all, and when the police captain met him in the street, for instance, Mitya noticed that he frowned and only bowed out of politeness. His acquaintance with the prosecutor was less intimate, though he sometimes paid his wife, a nervous and fanciful lady, visits of politeness, without quite knowing why, and she always received him graciously, and had for some reason taken an interest in him up to the last. He had not had time to get to know the investigating lawyer, though he had met him and talked to him twice, each time about the fair sex. "You're a most skilful lawyer, I see, Nikolai Parfenovitch," cried Mitya, laughing gaily. "But I can help you now. Oh, gentlemen, I feel like a new man, and don't be offended at my addressing you so simply and directly. I'm rather drunk, too, I'll tell you that frankly. I believe I've had the honour and pleasure of meeting you, Nikolai Parfenovitch, at my kinsman Musov's. Gentlemen, I don't pretend to be on equal terms with you. I understand, of course, in what character I'm sitting before you. Oh, of course, there's a horrible suspicion hanging over me. If Gregory has given evidence, a horrible suspicion. It's awful, awful. I understand that. But to business, gentlemen, I am ready, and we will make an end of it in one moment. For listen, gentlemen, since I know I'm innocent, we can put an end to it in a minute, can't we? Can't we?"
Mitya spoke much and quickly, nervously and effusively, as though he positively took his listeners to be his best friends. "So for the present we will write that you absolutely deny this charge brought against you," said Nikolai Parfenovitch impressively, and bending down to the secretary he dictated to him in an undertone what to write.
"Write it down? You want to write that down? Well, write it. I consent. I give my full consent, gentlemen. Only, do you see... Stay. Write this. Of disorderly conduct, I am guilty. Of violence on a poor old man, I am guilty. And there is something else at the bottom of my heart of which I'm guilty too. But that you need not write down." He turned suddenly to the secretary. "That's my personal life, gentlemen. That doesn't concern you. The bottom of my heart. That's to say... But of the murder of my old father I'm not guilty. That's a wild idea. It's quite a wild idea. I'll prove you that, and you'll be convinced directly. You'll laugh, gentlemen, you'll laugh yourself at your suspicion."
"Be calm, Dmitri Fyodorovitch," said the investigating lawyer, evidently trying to allay Mitya's excitement by his own composure. "Before we go on with our inquiry, I should like, if you will consent to answer, to hear you confirm the statement that you disliked your father Fyodor Pavlovitch, that you were involved in continual disputes with him. Here, at least, a quarter of an hour ago, you exclaimed that you wanted to kill him. I didn't kill him, you said, but I wanted to kill him."
"Did I exclaim that? Oh, that may be so, gentlemen, yes. Unhappily, I did want to kill him. Many times I wanted to. Unhappily.
You wanted to. Would you consent to explain what motives precisely led you to such a sentiment of hatred for your parent?"
"What is there to explain, gentlemen?"
Mitya shrugged his shoulders sullenly, looking down.
"I've never concealed my feelings. All the town knows about it. Everyone knows in the tavern. Only lately I declared them in Father Zosima's cell. And the very same day, in the evening, I beat my father. I nearly killed him, and I swore I'd come again and kill him before witnesses. Oh, 1,000 witnesses. I've been shouting aloud for the last month. Anyone can tell you that. The fact stares you in the face. It speaks for itself. It cries aloud. But feelings, gentlemen, feelings are another matter. You see, gentlemen?"
Mitya frowned.
"It seems to me that about feelings you've no right to question me. I know that you are bound by your office. I quite understand that. But that's my affair, my private, intimate affair. Yet, since I haven't concealed my feelings in the past, in the tavern, for instance, I've talked to everyone, so I won't make a secret of it now. You see, I understand, gentlemen, that there are terrible facts against me in this business. I told everyone that I'd kill him, and now, all of a sudden, he's been killed. So it must have been me. I can make allowances for you, gentlemen. I can quite make allowances. I'm struck all of a heap myself, for who can have murdered him, if not I? That's what it comes to, isn't it? If not I, who can it be? Who? Gentlemen, I want to know. I insist on knowing," he exclaimed suddenly. "Where was he murdered? How was he murdered? How and with what? Tell me," he asked quickly, looking at the two lawyers. "We found him in his study, lying on his back on the floor, with his head battered in," said the prosecutor. "That's horrible."
Mitya shuddered, and putting his elbows on the table, hid his face in his right hand.
"We will continue,"
interposed Nikolai Parfenovitch.
"So what was it that impelled you to this sentiment of hatred? You have asserted in public, I believe, that it was based upon jealousy." "Well, yes, jealousy, and not only jealousy.
Disputes about money?"
"Yes, about money, too. There was a dispute about 3,000 roubles, I think, which you claimed as part of your inheritance." 3,000? More! Cried Mitya hotly. "More than 6,000, more than 10, perhaps. I told everyone so, shouted it at them, but I made up my mind to let it go at 3,000. I was desperately in need of that 3,000. So the bundle of notes for 3,000 that I know he kept under his pillow, ready for Grushenka, I considered as simply stolen from me. Yes, gentlemen, I looked upon it as mine, as my own property." The prosecutor looked significantly at the investigating lawyer, and had time to wink at him on the sly. "We will return to that subject later," said the lawyer promptly. "You will allow us to note that point and write it down, that you looked upon that money as your own property?" "Write it down by all means. I know that's another fact that tells against me, but I'm not afraid of facts, and I tell them against myself. Do you hear? Do you know, gentlemen, you've taken me for a different sort of man from what I am," he added, suddenly gloomy and dejected. "You have to deal with a man of honour, a man of the highest honour. Above all, don't lose sight of it, a man who's done a lot of nasty things, but has always been and still is honourable at bottom in his inner being. I don't know how to express it. That's just what's made me wretched all my life, that I yearned to be honourable, that I was, so to say, a martyr to a sense of honour, seeking for it with a lantern, with the lantern of Diogenes, and yet all my life I've been doing filthy things, like all of us, gentlemen. That is, like me alone. That was a mistake. Like me alone, me alone. Gentlemen, my head aches." His brows contracted with pain. "You see, gentlemen, I couldn't bear the look of him. There was something in him ignoble, impotent, trampling on everything sacred, something sneering and irreverent, loathsome, loathsome. But now that he's dead, I feel differently." "How do you mean?" "I don't feel differently, but I wish I hadn't hated him so." "You feel penitent?" "No, not penitent. Don't write that. I'm not much good myself. I'm not very beautiful, so I had no right to consider him repulsive. That's what I mean. Write that down, if you like." Saying this, Mitya became very mournful. He'd grown more and more gloomy as the inquiry continued. At this moment another unexpected scene followed. Though Grushenka had been removed, she had not been taken far away, only into the room next but one from the blue room in which the examination was proceeding. It was a little room with one window, next beyond the large room in which they had danced and feasted so lavishly. She was sitting there with no one by her but Maximov, who was terribly depressed, terribly scared, and clung to her side as though for security. At their door stood one of the peasants with a metal plate on his breast. Grushenka was crying, and suddenly her grief was too much for her. She jumped up, flung up her arms, and with a loud wail of sorrow rushed out of the room to him, to her Mitya, and so unexpectedly that they had not time to stop her. Mitya, hearing her cry, trembled, jumped up, and with a yell rushed impetuously to meet her, not knowing what he was doing. But they were not allowed to come together, though they saw one another. He was seized by the arms, he struggled and tried to tear himself away. It took 3 or 4 men to hold him. She was seized too, and he saw her stretching out her arms to him, crying aloud as they carried her away. When the scene was over, he came to himself again, sitting in the same place as before, opposite the investigating lawyer, and crying out to them, "What do you want with her? Why do you torment her? She's done nothing, nothing." The lawyers tried to soothe him. About 10 minutes passed like this. At last Mihail Makarovitch, who had been absent, came hurriedly into the room and said in a loud and excited voice to the prosecutor, "She's been removed. She's downstairs. Will you allow me to say one word to this unhappy man, gentlemen? In your presence, gentlemen, in your presence." "By all means, Mihail Makarovitch," answered the investigating lawyer. "In the present case we have nothing against it."
"Listen, Dmitri Fyodorovitch, my dear fellow," began the police captain, and there was a look of warm, almost fatherly feeling for the luckless prisoner on his excited face. "I took your Agrafena Alexandrovna downstairs myself, and confided her to the care of the landlord's daughters, and that old fellow Maximov is with her all the time. And I soothed her, do you hear? I soothed and calmed her. I impressed on her that you have to clear yourself, so she mustn't hinder you, must not depress you, or you may lose your head and say the wrong thing in your evidence. In fact, I talked to her, and she understood. She's a sensible girl, my boy, a good-hearted girl. She would have kissed my old hands, begging help for you. She sent me herself to tell you not to worry about her, and I must go, my dear fellow. I must go and tell her that you are calm and comforted about her. And so you must be calm, do you understand? I was unfair to her. She is a Christian soul, gentlemen. Yes, I tell you, she's a gentle soul, and not to blame for anything. So, what am I to tell her, Dmitri Fyodorovitch? Will you sit quiet or not?"
The good-natured police captain said a great deal that was irregular, but Grushenka's suffering, a fellow creature's suffering, touched his good-natured heart, and tears stood in his eyes. Mitya jumped up and rushed towards him. "Forgive me, gentlemen! Oh, allow me!" he cried. "You've the heart of an angel, Mikhail Makarovich. I thank you for her. I will be calm, cheerful, in fact. Tell her in the kindness of your heart that I am cheerful, quite cheerful, that I shall be laughing in a minute, knowing that she has a guardian angel like you. I shall have done with all this directly, and as soon as I'm free I'll be with her. She'll see. Let her wait. Gentlemen," he said, turning to the two lawyers, "now I'll open my whole soul to you. I'll pour out everything. We'll finish this off directly, finish it off gaily. We shall laugh at it in the end, shan't we? But, gentlemen, that woman is the queen of my heart. Oh, let me tell you that. That one thing I'll tell you now. I see I'm with honourable men. She is my light. She is my holy one. And if only you knew— Did you hear her cry, 'I'll go to death with you'? And what have I, a penniless beggar, done for her? Why such love for me? How can a clumsy, ugly brute like me, with my ugly face, deserve such love that she is ready to go to exile with me? And how she fell down at your feet for my sake just now, and yet she's proud and has done nothing. How can I help adoring her? How can I help crying out and rushing to her as I did just now? Gentlemen, forgive me, but now I am comforted." And he sank back in his chair and, covering his face with his hands, burst into tears. But they were happy tears. He recovered himself instantly. The old police captain seemed much pleased, and the lawyers also. They felt that the examination was passing into a new phase. When the police captain went out, Mitya was positively gay. "Now, gentlemen, I am at your disposal, entirely at your disposal, and if it were not for all these trivial details, we should understand one another in a minute. I'm at these details again. I'm at your disposal, gentlemen, but I declare that we must have mutual confidence, you in me and I in you, or there'll be no end to it. I speak in your interests. To business, gentlemen, to business, and don't rummage in my soul. Don't tease me with trifles, but only ask me about facts and what matters, and I will satisfy you at once, and damn the details." So spoke Mitya. The interrogation began again.